Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Doomslayer won My Hero Academia? This amazing story was written by reeleffendeel. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Chapter 18. Dark Visions. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. Johnny Cash. Island's Central Tower elevator shaft. 40 minutes earlier. The Doomslayer vacantly stared ahead as the lights within the shaft flew by him. Still gripping onto the cable as it carried up the shaft, the Slayer went over his current objectives. Eliminate the League of Villains. Disable the WMD. Rescue the hostages. Procure support items from the vault. Exfiltrate from my island. It seemed like his mission here was finally reaching its end. His actions would never go unnoticed in this universe, and the people of Japan and the rest of the world as a whole would view him as a threat. He thought that wiping out an army of mercs infamous for killing heroes would probably be a godsend for those who lived in fear of them. But after the way he dispatched the entire organization, as well as how he defeated those heroes who attempted to impede him, everyone would be terrified of him, and he would most likely be branded as a villain. Villain. This world had a very skewed perception of what was considered good and evil. The heroes couldn't even handle this situation because they were either held back by their moral codes or because they all thought that killing was wrong. His thoughts once again went back to Izuku at the mall and, more recently, Nijire and Tamaki. If they were truly learning how to be heroes, then they should have been more aware of making the harsh decision to use deadly force at some point. But even then, it felt like the heroes were hesitant towards that idea as well. Was it because they were afraid that if they killed a villain, it would make them no better than the criminals they were trying to stop? Bullshit. If someone was threatening innocent lives and all other options had been exhausted, then you had absolutely no choice but to eliminate said aggressor. Police officers knew that soldiers knew that, but these heroes apparently weren't getting the message. They were going to have to accept reality sooner or later, regardless of their opinions on the matter. He had long since swallowed that bitter pill ever since he joined the army. During his war against hell, that notion didn't even bother him in the slightest. He hoped that none of the heroes in this world had to go through the same hardships he endured. Slayer. I have calculated that the League of Villains will escape and detonate the WMD before you arrive. I need to buy you time so that you can stop them as well as save the hostages. He clenched his teeth. During his fight with Nine and his toadies, the Hellwalker was wondering why he only saw Chainsaw and not the other members. It was as clear as day that they were using Nine as a distraction so they could arm the bomb, and Chainsaw was sent against him to see how strong he was. These bastards were crafty. I have found a solution to our predicament. There is currently a group of UA students who have avoided detection from the Sabers. I have instructed them to pursue the League and delay their escape. The Slayer's HUD showed security camera footage of a group of teenagers running through the halls. The Doomslayer wasn't thrilled with Vega's so-called solution. The LOV was extremely dangerous, and these kids were only in training. What the hell made Vega think they could stand a chance against them? This almost sounded like something Hayden would do. This course of action is something you disapprove of, and for that, I apologize. But we must ensure the League of Villains does not escape with the headset or destroy Island. As much as the Doomslayer disliked Vega's idea, he had to admit that the AI was right. During his fight against the Steel Saber remnants outside the tower, Vega had provided him info on the quirk amplification headset. A device that could enhance one's superpowers was deadly in the wrong hands, especially if a criminal mastermind like All for One managed to obtain it. Speaking of which, the Slayer still knew very little about this enigmatic villain. He and Vega were going to have to dig up more information on him before they decided to hunt him down. Situation update. A hero has just arrived on the island. Really now? It's about time they decided to grow a pair. Hopefully, he or she wouldn't try to get in his way. Confirmed. The hero in question is Maruko. Fuck. Why was it her again? This had to have been the fourth time he encountered her in such a short period. Was there some sort of reason why he kept running into her? The Slayer held up his hand and stared at his open palm. Why? Earth many eons ago. Community Recreation Center. I'm having some reservations about this, Em. Flynn said as he looked down at the boxing glove. Will you relax? I'm just giving you some extra combat lessons before you get thrown at the mercy of your drill sergeant. Emily laughed as she stepped into the boxing ring. But I'm already going through boot camp at the base tomorrow, Flynn said as he climbed into the ring. Why the extra lessons? What? You don't want your girlfriend to lend a helping hand? Emily teased as she places her hands on her hips. And no, that's not what I meant. Flynn quickly corrected himself. Relax, you big lug. Emily giggled as she limbered up. Her black gym outfit did little to hide her modest yet firm muscles and abdomen. Trust me, this will give you a leg up during training. I get that, but I don't want to end up accidentally hurting you, Flynn expressed. This isn't a sparring match, dope. This is a practice session. Emily humorously corrected him as she slipped on a pair of boxing pads. And besides, you couldn't lay a finger on me. Flynn stared at her for a couple of seconds before he contentedly chuckled. Neither can anyone else. He relented as he got into a boxing stance. Patting the boxing pads together, Emily dashed forward and Flynn threw out a series of consecutive jabs at her, which she easily blocked with the pads. They would continue with this training regimen for several minutes, with Flynn landing more hits that Emily parried. So, our anniversary is coming up. You got something planned for me? Well, I've been thinking. Island's central tower elevator shaft. Present day. The Slayer clenched his hand tightly and exhaled through his nostrils. Maruko has just launched several flares. This will likely prompt the heroes on the mainland to launch an assault to retake Island. You may have a physical altercation on your hands if they arrive. Couldn't be helped. If they wanted to do their jobs like they should have done hours ago, then that was their choice. But if they got in his way, they were going to walk away with a fuckton of bruises. His HUD notified him that he was nearing the second floor where the hostages were located. As soon as he neared the elevator door, the Slayer swung himself forward and let go of the cable. He balled up his fist as he neared the door and punched it open, sending the steel doors flying into the hallway as the doomslayer landed on the red carpet. The Slayer drew his combat shotgun and equipped the charged shot mod while sparks rained down on top of him from a destroyed ceiling light. His HUD showed him the path to the ballroom, and he pumped his shotgun before sprinting down the hall. In the ballroom, the 17 hired guns employed by Wolfram were starting to lose it. They were dreadfully twitchy, and they were currently arguing amongst each other. What the fuck do? We have to get out of here. Wolfram ditched us for crying out loud. Are you nuts? That psycho is probably still out there. Oh fuck, we're screwed. Shut up, just shut up. Let me fucking think. The guests and heroes were feeling very uneasy as well. What if that armored maniac came up here? After watching him horrifically dispatch the last of the Sabers and their leader on the main screen, they feared that he would come for them as well. All Might wearily eyed the group of arguing criminals. These men were steadily losing their composure and their minds. All it took was one wrong move, and the gunman would snap and kill everyone here, including him. Not to mention that all of the other heroes in the room were still retrained by the glowing blue cables coming from the floor. All Might tried to wrestle free from his bindings, but to no avail. He was still losing strength, and he wouldn't be able to remain in his powered-up state for long. This truly was becoming a hopeless situation for him. Unfortunately for him and everyone else, one of the still subdued heroes decided to open their mouth. Just let us go. Mr. Plastic, the #1 pro hero of England, pleaded to the group. Whatever your plans are, it's over. Get us free, and we can make sure dash. One of the gunmen smashed the butt of his assault rifle across Mr. Plastic's head, but due to his elasticity quirk, it cushioned the blow but disoriented him. And what? Throw us in prison for the rest of our goddamn lives. Fuck that. On the right side of the ballroom, near the huddled guests, the students of Class 1A watched the harrowing ordeal unfold before their eyes. We have to stop them, Momo whispered to her friends. They're going to kill somebody at this rate. Momo, there's 17 of them and 5 of us. What can we do? Dinky fretted. We can catch them off guard. Momo elaborated as she produced a smoke bomb from her arm via her quirk. She turned to Kyoka. As soon as I throw this, I need you and my Netta to disorient them. Dinky, Ida, you take them down and we'll back you up. They looked at each other worriedly before steeling themselves and nodding to her. They looked toward the men currently preoccupied with yelling at Mr. Plastic, and they slowly prepared themselves to charge in and subdue the villains as soon as Momo threw the bomb. Taking note of her friends silently readying their quirks, Momo wrapped her finger around the pin of the bomb and prepared to roll it towards the group. "Hey, what are you doing?" Momo whirled her head around just in time to see one of the captors come towards her from behind and smash his boot into her face. Momo was sent tumbling into the center of the room near the other gunman, while the one who just kicked her trained his gun on the other students who held their hands up. The undetonated smoke bomb rolled across the floor and stopped at the feet of the main group. One of them picked it up and inspected it before looking down at the teen with his fist trembling in anger. "You little cunt." The gunman snarled as he kicked Momo in the stomach hard enough to knock the air out of her lungs. The goon then grabbed her by the hair and lifted her head up to show her bloodied face to the terrified onlookers. "Were you gonna blow us all up? Huh?" He violently punched her across the face before dropping her to the floor and cocking his weapon. His eyes widened in horror. All Might thrashed himself around in a frantic attempt to free himself. The partygoers began sobbing and gasping at the sight. "Stop this, you fiend!" Pancration, the #1 pro-hero of Greece, exclaimed as he tried to free himself to no avail. "She's only a child." His response was met with a Scar assault rifle pointed at his face. The other gunman kicked Momo onto her back and planted his boot down on her throat. "Momo!" Kyoka screamed as one of the goons held her back. "No!" All Might shouted. Tears welled up in Yaoyorozu's eyes as she stared up at the barrel of the weapon pressed against her face. "Stupid fucking brat dash." Doom 2016, Rip and Tear. The gunman's head instantly exploded into a cloud of blood when the door to the ballroom was kicked open, followed by a loud shotgun blast. Momo's face was smattered with blood and screams filled the ballroom as the headless body crumpled to the floor. The shocked criminals snapped their heads around to see the armored killing machine standing in the doorway and pointing a shotgun directly at them. The doomslayer fired into the group, the charged burst tearing apart 5 of them and sending their guts and limbs splashing onto the floor. What happened next was a blur of spilled blood and screaming. The guests stampeded towards the exit, running past the slayer in a frenzied panic as he opened fire upon the villains. The crooks began flipping over the tables to use as barricades, but before they could fire back, the slayer threw a large dining room table at them to give the hostages more time to escape. As the last of the partygoers fled the room, Momo staggered her way over to her friends, her near-death experience, and seeing a man's head get vaporized into a red mist shaking her to her core. As soon as the least hostage left the room, the slayer was free to engage the criminals. He fired his shotgun at the barricade, the shells easily ripping through the tables and killing the goons. The heroes who were still tied up by the cables could only keep their heads down as they watched him gun down the villains with ruthless efficiency. One gunman who was brave enough vaulted over the barricade and tried to shank him with a Bowie knife only for the slayer to grab him by his vest and slam him down on a dining table. The slayer put away his shotgun and easily tore open the man's stomach, yanking out his intestines like they were party streamers while the restrained pro-heroes gasped in horror. The Udata students huddled against each other with expressions of pure, traumatized terror. Momo and Jiro were crying hysterically while Denki threw up next to Mineta, who screamed at the top of his lungs. Ida shook his head in open-mouthed horror as his legs shook uncontrollably. "Reowayagu sick fuwak." One of the villains roared as he flanked from the side and unloaded his assault rifle upon him. The Doomslayer grabbed a glass plate from the table and flung it at the gunman like a frisbee, instantly decapitating him. The severed head sailed through the air and right onto Kyoka's lap. The girl shrieked hysterically, as did the others, as she kicked her legs out, unintentionally jostling the head around. The Doomslayer drew his super shotgun and pointed at the disemboweled gunman, who was still alive and gurgling on his blood, before blowing him apart with his weapon. This gruesome execution sent a deluge of blood upon X, the #1 pro-hero of Germany. Heilige verdammt Skies. The Wasp heroine shrilled as she blinked the blood out of her eyes as it dribbled down her face. The Slayer began blasting the remaining felons left and right with his super shotgun as their bullets did nothing to halt his advance. He rapidly reloaded and fired at his targets, who were blown in half, staining the floor in a deep shade of crimson. "Don't you fucking move." The Slayer turned towards the main stage and saw the last of the terrorists pointing his scar at All Might. "Put your gun down now, or so help me God I'll dash." The Hellwalker instantly kicked a chair right at the gunman, and it smacked into his face before he could even pull the trigger. The goon fell to the floor next to All Might, his weapon clattering away as the doomslayer jumped up onto the stage. As the slayer stomped over to his downed prey, All Might felt himself sweating out of literal fear. The sheer amount of bloodlust emanating from this man was enough to almost make him suffocate. The slayer grabbed the villain by his neck and hefted him up into the air, preparing to end the scumbag in the worst way possible. The degenerate pulled out his arm-scored BXB submachine gun from his holster and aimed it right at the slayer's face. Yeah. The gunman roared as he fired his weapon directly into his visor. He unloaded his entire clip until it ran dry and was dumbstruck to see that there wasn't a scratch upon his visage. Glaring angrily, the slayer tore off the idiot's mask and grabbed him by his lower jaw. "Stop!" All Might pleaded as he tried to free himself. "Don't dash." The doomslayer ripped off the villain's lower jaw along with the entire frontal portion of his body, exposing his ribcage and internal organs. Screaming, yelling, and barfing filled the air as everyone watched the dead malefactor's guts slew out of his hollowed-out corpse and onto the floor near All Might as a cascade of blood flowed from the body afterward. The symbol of peace could no longer keep his lunch down and threw up, his puke mixing with the rapidly growing puddle of blood. The slayer threw the disemboweled gunman at the wall near the side door, just as Bakugo and Kirishima kicked it open and barged in. "Who's ready to die, assholes dash?" Bakugo shouted with his explosions forming in his hands, ready to kick some villain ass, right up until a dead body smashed into the wall next to him and exploded in a burst of viscera like a Kusadama confetti ball. It splattered all over the left half of Bakugo's body, coating him in red with some of it staining Kirishima as well. The underpants-clad teen let out a girlish, high-pitched shriek as he landed flat on his ass and scrambled away from his gore-soaked pal. Bakugo stood frozen in place like a statue. He could feel his arm and leg, as well as half his face, slick and sticky with still-warm blood. He shook all over as he looked down at his blood-stained hand, a severed leg and half of a human skull lying at his feet. Bakugo's ego and bravado had eroded in milliseconds, now replaced with fear and terror. His pupils dilated, his heart hammered in his chest, and he just realized there was a small intestine draped across his left shoulder. Kirishima had tears welling up in his eyes as a feeling of mind-numbing fright paralyzed his body. He hadn't felt this scared since that incident with the giant a long time ago. But this was different. This was on an entirely new level. He never took his gaze off the mangled bloody that had been reduced to the consistency of ground beef while looking like it was a smashed bug. He slowly turned to his right and saw dozens of dead bodies lying in dark red puddles, many of which had been blown apart. Kirishima's teeth chattered together. This was all way too much for him. All Might could see debilitating fear within the eyes of his students and glared up at the vigilante in anger, even though he was now lying face first in a puddle of blood and vomit. But no sooner did he look up when the doomslayer glared back down at him. All Might felt his anger falter when he locked gazes with the armored sociopath. The hero could barely see behind that tinted visor, which made his appearance all the more chilling. It was like the death itself had taken human form and Yagi was completely at its mercy. The doomslayer stared down at Yagi, carefully studying him. Now that he was seeing him in the flesh for the first time, he took notice of how unwell the symbol of peace looked. He could see tiny wisps of steam coming out of All Might's skin, and he was sweating like he was in a sauna. At least this did confirm that All Might was suffering from some kind of illness if the footage from the main server room was anything to go by. Internal scans indicate that All Might is missing a portion of his stomach and his respiratory system has been heavily ruptured. The doomslayer raised his eyebrow. What happened to this guy for that to happen? More accurately, what villain did this to him? As he began to deduce that All for One had something to do with All Might's state, a deep rumble shook the room, and he tilted his head upwards. Update. Maruko and the UA students have engaged the League of Villains. Narrowing his eyes, the Doom Marine drew his super shotgun and hopped off the stage. He ran through the ballroom until making a sharp right towards the second exit, where Bakugo stood in front of. Bakugo jerked in fright when he saw the vigilante barrel towards him, but he couldn't move. He was so shaken up by being coated in gore earlier that he couldn't will himself to use his quirk. All he could do was stand there utterly petrified as the man drew closer, his friends and All Might calling out his name and telling him to run, but he was too scared to budge. The Slayer closed the distance and ran straight past Katsuki. He bolted down the halls, leaving behind the traumatized and tied-up heroes. A part of him felt a little bit guilty about terrorizing those kids as he followed the waypoint. But it couldn't be helped. Those men were going to kill them, and if he had to dismember those fuckers to save them, then no skin off his bones. After following the path on his HUD through the tower, he came upon the stairwell that led up to the helicopter maintenance floor of the building. He could hear the sounds of a frenetic battle coming from just behind the door, so he quickly went up the steps and opened the door to witness a muscular teen in the buff fighting for different villains. Like before, Vega gave him info on the boy. Mirio Togata. Height, 5 feet 11 inches. Age, 17. Quirk, permeation allows him to become intangible, capable of phasing through walls or floors, as well as letting attacks harmlessly pass through him. Current status, third-year student at UA High School. The Doomslayer figured that this was Nijire and Tamaki's missing friend if the boy's current status was anything to go by. His quirk also sounded pretty impressive, though it didn't explain why he was naked. They hadn't noticed him yet as they were busy with their fight, so the Slayer quietly slipped into the smoke coming from the fires dotted around the room. Specs hung back a distance away while Sword Kill, Nobu, and Daigo fought the nudist who was easily beating them in every regard. They couldn't lay a hit on the kid, but Specs secretly found a weak spot. The boy had to concentrate on who was attacking him to use his quirk. All Specs needed was an opening, and he could snipe the little bastard with a headshot. His rifle eye focused on his target. Specs patiently waited until he found his chance. As soon as Mirio jumped back to avoid a blow from Daigo, Specs was about to fire until the Slayer snuck up from behind and put his fist straight through the back of his skull and pulled out a chunk of his brain. "Holy fuck," Nobu exclaimed as everyone else whirled around and recoiled in horror at what they saw. The Doomslayer lifted Specs over his head and tore the body in half vertically, splattering blood on him. The criminals and Mirio, the boy, staggered backward in shock. The Great Slayer barreled towards Swordkill, who had no chance to defend himself, as the Slayer tore off his arms and used the arm blades to decapitate him before the villain could even scream. Nobu began hurling compression blasts at him, while Daigo furiously roared and charged like an angry bull. The Doomslayer easily dodged the blasts as well as an overhead fist from Daigo before ripping open his stomach with Swordkill's severed limbs. Daigo instantly went into shock at the sight of seeing his guts spill out of his body, and the Slayer chucked the limbs away, grabbed Daigo by the shoulders, and lifted him with ease, using him as a meat shield against Nobu's attack. Nobu had previously charged up a large compression ball in both of his hands and flung it at the Doomslayer, only to realize too late that he hefted Daigo in front of him and his comrade's head was evaporated in an instant. The Slayer chucked the body at Nobu, who jumped out of the way, but the Hell Walker bolted towards him in a flash and smashed his foot into Nobu's leg, breaking it like it was a twig. Nobu screamed as he collapsed to the floor, but had enough strength to swing his hand up and try to displace the Slayer's midsection with his quirk. Unfortunately for him, the Slayer caught Nobu's arm and punched it hard enough for his arm bone to pop out, eliciting a scream of agony from the villain. He then shoved Nobu's arm up to his face, the exposed bone spearing into the villain's mouth and exiting out the top of his head. The Slayer let the body slump to the floor and looked upwards to the ceiling as he saw dust rain down on top of him. Knowing that the others were still up on the roof, he made his way over to the stairway that led up. "Why?" came a shuddering voice from behind. The Slayer glanced over his shoulder at Mirio, the nude boy having flecks of blood on the left side of his body. He was shaking like a leaf, his face a fusion of fear and anger. "Why did you do that?" Mirio demanded, his voice breaking from the massacre he just witnessed and was powerless to stop it. It had happened so fast and so violently that he was unable to stop the man from slaughtering the villains. You didn't have to kill them." Before Mirio could continue voicing his outrage against the Doomslayer, a barrel full of gasoline that was laying nearby suddenly exploded, and in the blink of an eye, the blood-soaked madman was upon him. Moreau jerked back in terror when the Slayer whipped his hand out and caught something out of the air. Mirio looked to his right and saw a jagged slab of sharpened metal inches away from his face that the Slayer was gripping onto. Mirio stumbled backward until he landed on his bare behind, staring up at him in fear. The doomslayer glared down at him for a couple of seconds before dropping the chunk of shrapnel and walking away from the teen. As the slayer disappeared around the corner at the far end of the room, Mirio slowly turned his frightened gaze to the metal shard. The realization behind that shard hit him like a bus. He could have died. He was too distracted to notice the barrel about to explode earlier and knew that he wouldn't have been able to activate his quirk in time before that piece of sharpened steel impaled him through the head. But the vigilante had seen it coming and caught the shard before it could kill Mirio. That man just saved his life. Meanwhile, the doomslayer had reached the top of the stairwell only to find it blocked off by rubble. He balled up his fist and threw out a punch that destroyed the blockade and allowed him to resume his trek up the stairs and onto the roof. The slayer walked through the smoke cloud in full view of everyone present. "Oh shit, it's him," he heard Maruko mutter as he turned his attention to her. The doomslayer felt himself go rigid when he saw the numerous cuts on Maruko's arms and legs along with blood dripping from the wounds. A sudden surge of anger flared up inside the slayer as he glared hatefully at the group of villains who stood at the helipad. My scans have revealed that Volcano and Curator are in possession of a secondary quirk. Sending you the information now, Reading through the info on his HUD, the Slayer learned that Curator could transform parts of his body into pieces of broken glass, while Volcano could control nanomachines. Shouldn't be much of a problem for him. But what intrigued him was how the two villains each had a completely different quirk. The Nomu creature he fought earlier had multiple quirks, so it wasn't much of a coincidence for Curator and Volcano. Somehow AFO was behind this, just like with All Might's injuries. Maruko took a step away from the vigilante while regarding him with caution and suspicion. Shoto, Uraraka, and Melissa didn't move a muscle as Izuku swallowed fearfully. The villains studied the vigilante. The sight of blood caked onto his suit unnerving Dusty and Gust. From afar, Wolfram regained consciousness, but he was in terrible pain from Volcano's blow. His eyes made his way over to the man that ruined everything. The armored butcher that made mincemeat out of the steel sabers. If that man never came, this operation would have been a resounding success for the League of Villains, and he would have received high praise from All for One. But all of it was dashed to the winds when he came along. Wolfram struggled to pick himself up, now fueled by hatred for the vigilante, but then he noticed something lying a few feet away from him. The briefcase containing the quirk amplification headset. Well. The invincible barbarian finally arrives to face the perpetrators behind the siege. Curator drawled unimpressively, though this was only to cover his unease towards the Doomslayer. I suppose there's some form of dash. Curator received the ultimate shut the fuck up from the Great Slayer when he whipped out his super shotgun faster than anyone could follow and blasted Curator's helmet off his face. The Slayer reloaded and darted towards the villains. No more talking, murdering time. As Curator fell to the ground, completely disoriented, Volcano slammed his fist into the ground while a mass of nanites flowed into the concrete. Nano coffin. Volcano yelled as a swarm of nanites erupted from the ground beneath the Slayer and engulfed him inside a large coffin. Volcano smiled victoriously. Now I'll just pry off that suit he's wearing and rip him apart. Maruko and Izuku heard that, and they, despite the bloodshed the man unleashed this day, ran towards the purplish/black coffin to try and free him. But then the vigilante's fist shot out of the coffin, and he wrenched himself free of his prison with his bare hands. Volcano balked at the sight of the barbarian splitting his attack in half before composing himself and summoning another nanobot-enhanced attack. This time, several tendrils began snaking around his arms and legs and tried to penetrate his armor in an attempt to absorb pieces of his armor and incorporate them into his nanobots. But something was wrong. For whatever reason, his nanites couldn't pierce his suit. Dusty and Gust helped up Curator, who clutched the right side of his deformed head. While the shotgun blast only destroyed his helmet, the force of the buckshot fractured his skull. "What the hell are you doing, Volcano? Absorb his armor," Curator angrily shouted. "I can't." Volcano shot back. His nanites felt like they were being burned away by something. The Doomslayer grabbed onto the tendrils and crushed them in his grasp before ripping them apart vigorously. As the other watched on, stunned at the man's strength, Mirio came running up the stairs after recovering from his episode. "Guys," Mirio called out to them. Everyone turned around and had to look away from his nude form. "Do you, need some help?" Maruko inquired uncomfortably. I'm fine, he replied, taking a glance at the vigilante before gulping nervously. Did we deactivate the WMD yet? Yes, Melissa confirmed as she picked up the rocket. But we needed to get this as far away from them as possible. Izuku and Maruko glanced behind them to see the vigilante tear off the rest of the tendrils before turning his attention to the villains. Maruko's mouth formed a thin line as she thought of a strategy. She placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Kid, get everyone out of here. Leave this to me. I'm dead serious this time, she said while never taking her eyes off the vigilante. But what about Dash? Izuku started, looking at her lacerations before she cut him off. Believe me, this won't slow me down, Maruko assured him with her trademark smile. Just get that bomb away from here. Although Izuku was hesitant to leave her here with a group of villains and that berserker, he had to admit that she was right. He nodded to her and ran over to his friends. Let's go. Volcano saw the group heading towards the exit and scowled. This time, he swung his hand and unleashed a wave of lava that shot past Maruko and towards the others. Izuku and his friends turned around and gasped at the sight of a miniature tidal wave of magma about to engulf them. No, Maruko exclaimed just as a green blur darted past her. The wave was nearly upon the group as Shoto tried to freeze it to no avail. It was far too hot, and it melted as ice within seconds. Izuku's life flashed before his eyes as the lava wave drew closer until a large shape suddenly dove in front of him. It was the vigilante. The doomslayer spread out his arms just as the lava swallowed up his body. Izuku and the others shielded their eyes as the magma splashed outwards away from them as the majority of the lava encased the vigilante in boiling volcanic residue. Everyone lowered their hands away from their eyes and was greeted with the disturbing sight of the already cooling lava taking on the shape of the man who jumped in front of them. It had dawned upon the teenagers and Maruko that the magma wave could have killed them had the man not shielded them with his own body. He just sacrificed himself to save their lives. They stood there with shocked expressions as their gazes lingered on the solidified form of their deceased savior. Maruko was just as stunned as the others. This man went out of his way to protect those kids at the cost of his own life. Thinking back to what that teacher at the airport said about him saving her and the school kids, Rumi guessed that somewhere in that fucked up head of his was some semblance of humanity. And his last act of selfless valiancy only enforced that fact. Well, that's one down, Volcano boasted as he popped his knuckles. Curator shot him an unpleasant look. That attack could have detonated the rocket and ended up killing them as well. Scowling furiously at the villains, Maruko was just about to launch herself at them before she heard a disturbance from behind her. She turned around and witnessed the solidified body of the vigilante start to crack and shake. The fissure grew larger until the doomslayer exploded out of his pyroclastic sarcophagus, scattering chunks of cooled lava across the roof. His armor was aglow from the heat of Volcano's attack, but it did not melt his predator suit one bit. Compared to the literal oceans of lava in hell, this was lukewarm. The jaws of every occupant on the roof fell open. Izuku couldn't help but feel amazed. What kind of material was that armor made of? It could shrug off lava like it was rain for crying out loud. Maruko was speechless when she saw the visor briefly illuminated by the superheated armor and could distinctly make out the rage-filled orbs of the vigilante, staring daggers at the villains and promising them a world of hurt. The villains were also shocked as well, with Volcano doing a double take between his hand and the Doomslayer. Gust Boy shook his head. That's not right. The Doomslayer wrenched his feet free and slowly marched towards the villains while cracking his knuckles. Suddenly, the tower began to rumble as glowing blue fissures formed underneath everyone's feet. Doom 2016 Ultraviolence. Sections of the roof began levitating up from the ground until metal cables and other metallic objects erupted from the ground. Everyone was nearly thrown off their feet as they backed away from the fissures. Large pillars of concrete and steel support beams began to coalesce into a massive, tower-like structure formed on the helipad as electrical cables coiled around its base like a mass of snakes. Two giant arms ending in oversized fists made out of rubble and warped metal formed at the sides of the tower, which now looked like a gargantuan, patchwork golem several stories tall. Oh, come on! Maruko exasperated as she stood next to the UA students. Where the hell did this thing come from? The doomslayer asked himself the same question in his head. The villains, who were on the leftmost side of the roof away from the slayer, were awestruck at the sight of this monstrous construct. That is until Dusty Ash noticed something located in the center of the tower. Wolfram, what the Fuechi's wearing the headset. The slayer, Maruko, and the students who were within earshot heard her, and now that she mentioned it, they could easily make out Wolfram sticking out of the monstrosity like a sore thumb. He had lost his shirt, revealing his hideously oversized muscles that were ripping out of his body, which was now glowing a bright orange. His eyes had taken on a deep, dark purple hue, while his lopsided grin and frayed hairline gave him a menacing visage. Wolfram, what are you doing? Take that device off right now before you damage it. Curator loudly ordered him. But Wolfram wasn't listening, still wearing that Cheshire Cat smile. Wolfram, I am ordering you to dash. Wolfram suddenly swung his fist down at the villains, forcing them to dodge out of the way. I'm not your bitch anymore, Curator. Wolfram declared, his voice taking on an echoey, distorted tone. I'm no one's bitch. Thrusting his golem's fingers into the ground, Wolfram swung it upwards and raked off a large portion of the roof, sending the villains flying off the roof and down into the city below. Wolfram flexed his fingers before unleashing a haunting, insanity-fueled laugh. Ah, eh. I feel like I can fuck the entire world. Everyone, except for the Slayer, became highly disturbed at Wolfram's vulgar proclamation, but Melissa was the most shaken out of all of them. She sunk to her knees while still holding the bomb, her eyes never leaving Wolfram. Dad, what have you made? The Doomslayer grimaced as he glared up at the empowered madman. How did David Shield think this was going to help All Might? The quirk amplification headset has augmented Wolfram's overall combat abilities by 1000%. But this has caused a side effect. It triples the body's production of endorphins, enabling the wearer of the headset to enter a state of heightened euphoria, but heavily damages their mental stability in the process. Wolfram is now dangerously schizophrenic. The Slayer calmly drew his rocket launcher and prepared himself for a fight. Maruko readied herself as well until she noticed the group of youngsters was still staring at the villain before them. What are you kids waiting for, Christmas? She barked at them. Get out of here before I kick you off of this frickin' roof. Startled by Maruko's outburst, Izuku and Melissa ran for the exit while Uraraka and Mirio lugged a heavily wounded Shoto along with them. As soon as they left, Wolfram swung his golem's fists at the Slayer and Maruko. But the heroine jumped up at the right fist and was destroyed with a powerful double kick, while the Doomslayer reared his armored fist back and threw out a punch that shattered the left fist into pieces. As the golem reeled back, the Hellwalker and Maruko looked at each other, impressed with how they destroyed the fists. You think that's gonna stop me? As soon as I'm done shredding you two in half, I'm gonna peel All Might's skull apart like a banana. Wolfram hideously roared as he sent a wave of cables towards the pair. Each of the cables ended in exposed wires crackling with electricity as they slithered towards them like eels. Maruko bounded across the rooftop as she avoided the cable strikes, and despite the blistering pain in her cut-up arm and leg, she powered through it. Luna Ring. She cartwheeled through the air while kicking out her legs to hack apart the attacking cables like she was a human buzzsaw. The Slayer was just as easily holding his own, destroying the cables with his rocket launcher as he dodged their whip-like blows. One cable snuck up from Bing and lashed out with its electrical wires, but the Slayer whirled around and grabbed it, severing it, and using it to club away another series of tentacles gunning for him. You ruined everything, you little green whore. I'm gonna make your death as slow as dash. Wolfram was forced to block a series of rockets launched straight at him with a reformed metal fist, courtesy of the Slayer's lock-on burst. The Doomslayer kept launching a stream of rockets at Wolfram, who continued to smack them away but blew apart his construct's hands in the process. This provided an opening for the rabbit heroine to use a slab of metal jutting out of the ground as a springboard to cannonball herself towards Wolfram. Luna Rocket. Maruko thrust both of her feet at Wolfram, and the villain was forced to block with his overly muscled arms. Her feet slammed into the villain with so much force that it managed to overpower him in his enhanced state. Both of Wolfram's arms broke under the pressure, and Maruko used this chance to slam her heel right into Wolfram's face and rebound off of him. The blow caused the metallic giant to lurch backward and nearly fell off the tower when the doomslayer unleashed another barrage of seeking rockets at Wolfram in a series of explosions. As Maruko landed on a ripped-up chunk of concrete, she smiled in satisfaction as she watched the titanic metal hodgepodge teeter over the edge. Maruko saw this chance to knock him off the building, and she sprinted towards Wolfram, but then noticed the vigilante running towards him as well. Although Maruko always considered herself to be a tough, hard-as-nails woman, she had to admit that after everything she saw today and how that guy was almost next to invincible, she knew that she could not take him on as much as she wanted to pay him back for what happened at the port. And yet, why did he save innocent lives and seemingly chose to aid her? Regardless, she had to focus on taking the villain down before he could take this whole tower down. Maruko, unfortunately, started to eat her own words as a dark purple aura surrounded Wolfram, and a wave of sharpened steel speared out of the ground, forcing her and the vigilante to backpedal away. More cables shot out of the base of the golem and anchored themselves to the roof, pulling Wolfram back up. More metal debris was ripped out from the building and formed around the golem until it looked like it was wearing a massive suit of jagged metal. The giant hands grew back, but now they were larger and rebars jutting out of their knuckles like it was wearing a pair of cestus gloves. "Ah, crap baskets," Maruko muttered as her ears drooped. Wolfram is incorporating anything metallic into his reinforced body via his enhanced magnetism quirk. His current area of influence expands around the current vicinity, but it is steadily growing. If he is not terminated soon, he will be capable of breaching the main vault and potentially absorbing the support items inside. The doomslayer couldn't let that happen. He was about to fire a slew of rockets at Wolfram, but the giant punched the ground. A swath of metal cubicle columns shot out of the ground towards him. He rolled out of the way while Maruko swiftly sidestepped out of the way and demolished them with her kicks with an excitable smile. As the Slayer went over to assist, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. Turning around, he could see Curator, Volcano, Dusty Ash, and Gust Boy flying away on a large disc made of ash in the distance. They were escaping from my island. The Great Slayer got down on one knee and aimed through the scope of his rocket launcher to get a lock until he heard a grunt of pain from Maruko. He looked over his shoulder to see her recklessly charge towards Wolfram, only for a column to shoot from the ground and slam into her, sending her tumbling a distance away. Focusing back on the escaping villains, the Slayer could feel his hands shake when he heard Maruko unleash her war cry. The villains were almost out of range, and the Slayer was torn between pulling the trigger or helping Maruko. He couldn't understand why he was hesitating like this. He gnashed his teeth together as the villains drew further away. Another rumble shook the building as Maruko stomped on another swarm of sentient cables before one snuck up from behind and electrocuted her. When Flynn Taggart heard her yell of pain, an unmistakable image assaulted his mind. Emily. Maruko landed on the ground, her body convulsing painfully as the cable surrounded her. Her eyes widened as the cables reared back to strike when a loud gunshot blew most of them into pieces. Maruko's mouth fell open when she saw the vigilante, armed with his sawed-off, blasting away the cables and tearing them apart one-handed. Grateful but not about to let herself get shown up, Maruko launched herself at the remaining cables in an unnatural burst of adrenaline. Her powerful kicks made quick work of the makeshift tentacles while the Doomslayer tore the last one in half with his free hand. "Will you two just die already?" Wolfram snarled as he summoned a wave of metal and rock pillars at them, but the duo was not deterred. They dodged the incoming blows and retaliated by destroying them via crushing kicks or devastating punches. They were quickly blazing a trail right towards the villain, who was forced to slam both of his fists into the ground and destroyed a large portion of the roof, which then slid off the right side of the tower. The Slayer and Maruko, who were blown away by the impact, landed hard on the ground, but Maruko was near the edge and she fell off the tower. Maruko cursed as she felt herself fall through the air, but at the last second, the vigilante nearly dove over the edge and caught her by the foot. Maruko was utterly gobsmacked as she stared up at her unexpected savior, who had a strong grip on her leg. Wolfram took advantage of their precarious position and sent a downward fist hurtling towards them, but the Slayer hoisted himself up along with Maruko, and without missing a beat, the pair already responded with their respective attacks. The Doomslayer threw an earth-shattering punch while Maruko jumped up and kicked out with both of her feet, their combined attacks connecting with a massive fist, and the resulting force of the blows redirected the attack right back at Wolfram. The metallic gauntlet smashed right into his main body, the exposed pieces of rebar penetrating his chest and causing him to gag up blood through his oversized muscles mitigated potentially fatal injuries. As the construct lurched backward, Maruko and the doomslayer stared at each other. For Maruko, she could only express confusion at the slayer. She had no idea what his motive was for saving her, but she was nonetheless grateful that he did. But she still mistrusted the man who turned this entire island into a slaughterhouse and put some of her comrades in the hospital. Nothing seemed to add up about him. For Flynn, it was like he was looking at his late wife all over again. Despite the obvious difference in nationality, Maruko still resembled Emily in so many ways than one. When he was unable to prevent the deaths of his wife, son, and their pet rabbit from the demons during the invasion of his Earth, he blamed himself for being unable to save them. Hearing or even seeing Maruko in pain brought him back to the moment when he lost his family, and he did not want to experience that feeling of heartrending sorrow again. The sounds of shifting metal caused the two to turn their attention to the right to witness Wolfram recovering from his self-inflicted blow. Maruko took one last look at the Slayer before making her choice. "You better not shoot me in the back," she warned as she turned to face Wolfram while taking up her fighting stance, ignoring the pain she was in. The Bane of Hell responded by drawing his super shotgun and standing beside her. He wouldn't dream of it. Island rooftops. Several seconds earlier, free-falling through the air, the villains landed on a nearby rooftop near the tower. The landing wasn't exactly comfortable as they smacked against the hard concrete, skidding to a painful stop near the edge of the building. The villains painfully forced themselves to stand and glared at the top of the tower where they heard Wolfram laughing manically and the sounds of battle taking place. That's when they all became very, very livid. "I am going to kill him," Curator calmly grounded out, both of his hands forming into glass shards while his arms took on a whale-like skin texture. "Get in line." Volcano breathed through his teeth as his hands boiled with scorching anger. He didn't care if Curator was second in command. He just wanted to flay Wolfram alive. "Guys, we've got a situation." Gust Boy called out the two villains, causing them to glare at him and scaring the living daylights out of him in the process. "What now?" Curator growled in annoyance. "Heroes," Dusty Ash said tersely as she looked through a pair of collapsible binoculars she brought with her. Walking over near the edge of the building where she stood and squinting out to the vast sea beyond, Curator and Volcano could almost make out two large boats approaching the island at a rapid pace while illuminated by the bright moon in the night sky. "Perfect," Volcano grunted sarcastically. "Now they're on the agenda." A vein popped on Curator's head. He was close to reaching the end of his rope. This entire operation had been a complete nightmare from beginning to end. Curator carefully weighed his options as the other villains stayed silent. They could try and eliminate Wolfram and retrieve the headset, but that would mean they would have to fend off the number 5 pro hero and that thing. They could try to enter the building and retrieve the bomb from the brats, but for all they knew, they could have freed All Might and the heroes in the ballroom by now. But any one of those choices would close off all of their escape routes if that small army of heroes arrived. Each of those scenarios would result in a huge fight that they didn't have time for. Curator knew that there was only one option left, and it was not something he could consider lightly. Unfortunately, due to the current circumstances, he had to go for the latter choice of retreating. As much as he loathed having to disappoint All for One, they also couldn't afford to be captured either. For the first time in his service to All for One in the League of Villains, Curator took a loss. "Dusty, get us out of here," Curator calmly ordered as the other regarded him with stunned silence. "The mission is scrubbed." Volcano's shoulders sagged as he grunted in disappointment, while Dusty Ash and Gust Boy looked at each other worriedly. Failing AFO was basically signing your own death warrant. But maybe they could convince AFO that Wolfram ruined their attempts to retrieve the headset and spare themselves a messy death. Dusty, with a look of reluctance, summoned an ash disc for everyone to board upon. Once that was done, Dusty flew her disc off the roof and into the air where they flew past the tower where the battle was taking place. They scowled bitterly as they flew past it, completely unaware they were in the crosshairs of the Doomslayer's rocket launcher, who was forced to disengage to aid Maruko. They flew over the burning city and the walls until they cleared Island. They kept low under the cover of the clouds to conceal their movements from the heroes. Hopefully, they were too focused on retaking Island to notice. As they soared through the air looking for a secluded place to land, their thoughts went back to the vigilante, and they found themselves asking the same question Dusty Ash had when they arrived. How did they not see this guy coming? Island's central tower stairwell. Present time. The rumbling from the rooftop nearly knocked the group off their feet as they ran down the stairs. Izuku and Uraraka carried Shoto as he was too badly wounded to walk. Melissa still had the bomb in her arms while Mirio followed behind. How close are we to the ballroom? Mirio asked Izuku. Midoriya dug out his cell phone and checked the map. Not far. We just need to go down one more area. Another tremor, this one far stronger than the last, shook the whole stairwell, and the teens were sent tumbling down the stairs. Melissa grabbed onto a railing but accidentally dropped the WMD in the process, and it fell over the edge. Everyone gasped in horror, but Shoto outstretched his hand, and a wave of ice engulfed the device and most of the stairwell. Sorry, it was all I could think of. Shoto groaned. Uraraka patted his shoulder reassuringly as they all went over to the ice wall at the bottom of the stairs. The WMD was sticking out of the miniature iceberg, so Izuku used 5% of his quirk to chip away at the ice surrounding the bomb with quick jabs. He finally extracted the bomb and looked it over while Shoto was able to muster up enough strength to melt the ice with his superheated hand. Midoriya carefully set the bomb down and inspected it while everyone else held their breaths. No cracks or anything broken. I think we're safe. Midoriya confirmed. Everyone let out the breaths they had been holding in. Thank God. Melissa buried her face into her hands. Likewise, Mirio wiped the sweat off his forehead. I can't believe the League brought a nuke with them. But how? Uraraka exclaimed as she helped an exhausted Shoto up again. How did they get their hands on something like this? Izuku was mentally asking himself that same question. At first, he thought the LOV was just a band of villains who grouped up to try and ransack UA while attempting to get a shot at All Might in the process. But now after his repeated run-ins with them, it became clear that they were, a highly dangerous organization who were perfectly willing to kill thousands of innocent people to get what they wanted. What you are looking at is not a nuclear weapon /. Everyone jolted at the sound of their mysterious contact announcing themselves again through Midoriya's phone resting on one of the steps in front of them. Who is that? Melissa questioned, but she only received a shrug from the others. The device is a miniature rocket containing VX poison gas, a deadly, inhumane weapon that was categorized by the United Nations as a weapon of mass destruction in 1993. In 2103, the UN led a joint operation with other countries to seek out and destroy all known caches of the nerve agent. They were successful, but it would appear that the League of Villains was able to acquire the last known sample in the world, PPP poison gas. Midoriya stammered, eyes as wide as saucers. They were going to gas us. Correct. If the casing were to be ruptured, it would be lethal up to 100 feet and terminate the 5 of you. The LOV had installed the casing into a rocket so it could be launched into the air and detonated at a fixed height for maximum dispersion of the agent. It would kill every single living being on this island, /. As everyone looked at each other with mortified expressions, Shoto swallowed grimly. How exactly does this stuff kill you? He inquired. VX gas is a cholinesterase inhibitor. It stops the brain from sending nerve messages down the spinal cord within 30 seconds, effectively rendering anyone exposed to the gas incapable of breathing. Any form of epidermal exposure or inhalation, and you'll know via a twinge at the small of your back. That's the poison seizing your nervous system. Your muscles will painfully contract while your body goes into increasingly violent spasms to the point where you can break your bones in the process. After which you will expire from asphyxiation due to your brain being unable to transmit orders to your lungs. The League of Villains intended to use this to eliminate any witnesses, /. Everyone was speechless. The description alone was enough to make VX sound 10 times more frightening than any nuclear bomb. To think that the League was going to unleash something this horrific upon innocent people. Miss Shield, /. She jumped at the sudden announcement of her name. The main server room should allow you to disable the security systems restraining the heroes and contact a team of pro heroes en route to Island. Although Vega could just as easily do it himself, he wanted these youths to have some level of control due to their already traumatized mental states. Heroes are coming? Finally. Urarka sighed, as did Mirio and Melissa. Your father is also present in the server room, Miss Shield. He is unconscious but safe. Melissa looked momentarily surprised, but that was when her tone shifted drastically. She looked down at her feet, bringing her tightly clenched hand up to her chest. She appeared conflicted and almost resentful. Mirio was just about to ask her what was wrong until another series of rumbles rattled the stairwell. I think we should get going. Mirio spoke for everyone as he raised a finger. Uraraka helped Shoto down the stairs while Mirio grabbed the bomb and followed Melissa down. Izuku picked up his phone and began to follow after them, but stopped. He looked back up the staircase and gulped apprehensively. His worried expression turned darkly serious as he ran up the steps, much to the group's confusion when they witnessed this. Deku, where are you going? Uraraka called out. I'm going back up to the roof, Izuku said as he stopped going back up the stairwell. Maruko needs support, and I don't trust that vigilante. Izuku, no. Mirio implored. It's far too dangerous to go up there. I would advise against this course of action, Mr. Midoriya, I have to stop him from killing that villain. Midoriya argued as he glared at his phone, the screen showing the contact symbol. He internally asked himself how and why this person knew his name. It doesn't have to end that way. Just let me remove the headset and restrain him so I can take him to the authorities. Wolfram has become a danger to everyone on the island and now poses a significant threat. Attempting to subdue him via non-lethal methods is impossible at this point, and he should therefore be eliminated. No, he doesn't have to die. He can't just solve every problem with extreme violence. Izuku fired back. That much is true. But in this case, Wolfram is beyond the point of mental recovery and must be --. Stop it, Izuku suddenly shouted, his voice almost loud enough to drown out the rumbling from above. Enough of this. All of this death and bloodshed. He can't keep killing people like this. He can't. Despite the tremors coming from the roof, everyone stayed silent as they watched Izuku breathing heavily, most likely straining his vocal cords. Everyone had heard the contact's grim assessment of the situation and was left at a loss. Uraraka could feel the sting of tears welling up in her eyes as she felt Izuku's desperation for this whole nightmare to stop. The people you are referring to were mercenaries and villains who were planning on murdering innocent civilians. By the time the pro-heroes came here to stop them, they would have already killed all of the hostages, the heroes, and escaped with Island's support items to use for their own purposes. There was no alternative solution to resolve this situation peacefully. We did what had to be done, But it's still not right. Izuku desperately implored, trying to find some way to get him to see reason. Then would it be right to let them escape after committing what amounts to a small-scale genocide? But would it be right to allow the Steel Sabers to continue hunting down heroes? That's not what I meant, Would it be right to let families suffer from their actions? Would it be right to not eliminate them in order to prevent them from endangering more people? The world is not black and white, Izuku Midoriya. It is gray, And with that, Izuku's phone shut itself off. The boy could only stare at his phone, wide-eyed and speechless. He was completely oblivious to the persistent rumblings occurring from the roof and the rattling of the stairwell. That is until he felt a hand tightly grab his wrist, which caused him to look over his shoulder. It was Uraraka. His eyes were locked onto those tear-filled eyes of hers. We have to go, she pleaded. Izuku stared at her for a few more seconds before looking down the stairs and seeing Melissa carrying the rocket with Mirio, helping Shoto down the stairs. Swallowing, Izuku stuffed his phone back into his pocket and nodded, following her down the stairs afterward. Island's central tower rooftop. The doomslayer dodged an overhead blow from Wolfram while Maruko moved in and axe-kicked the hand, splitting it in two. Letting out a snarl, Wolfram sent an open palm heading their way to knock them off the roof, but Maruko backflipped over the blow while the slayer reared his fist back and punched straight through it. Wolfram reeled his hands back away from the lethal pair as they swiftly retaliated. The Slayer launched a barrage of missiles at the villain, while Maruko punted a truck-sized slab of uprooted concrete. The warheads against the giant's metal armor, blasting some pieces off of it, while the slab impaled itself into the golem's elbow joint, preventing its right arm from moving. Maruko pumped her fist while the Slayer hefted his rocket launcher with satisfaction. But this was short-lived when Wolfram let out a chuckle and the blown-off pieces of his armor gravitated towards him and reattached themselves back to his body. Maruko grimaced at this and gave her temporary partner a sideways glance. "I don't suppose you still have that big laser cannon in your magic pockets, do you?" The Doomslayer kept his focus on Wolfram. He knew she was talking about the Gauss cannon he used to subdue Ryukyu earlier, but he had burned through all of his plasma ammo against the steel sabers. The same thing went for his heavier munitions for the HAR and chain gun. All he had left now was a plentiful supply of shotgun shells and a handful of rockets. He still had his BFG, but he didn't want Maruko to be an accidental casualty. While the Argent tendrils only sought out beings with Argent energy within them, the blast radius was more than enough to get her killed, something he wanted to avoid. "Go ahead, keep attacking. It's only gonna make me stronger." Wolfram cackled as he raised his golem's arm and swung it down at them. They both dodged the blow, and the Doomslayer double-jumped onto the hand and ran up its arm, while Maruko made a beeline for the other arm. The Slayer switched to his combat shotgun and attached the explosive shot mod. He rapidly fired a volley of grenades at Wolfram, who summoned a wall of metal fragments to block the explosives. Due to the Slayer's UAC brand explosive munitions being stronger than modern explosives, each blast from the Octanatrocubane rounds destroyed Wolfram's shield with ease, causing the villain to summon more to protect himself. Meanwhile, Maruko closed the distance on the other arm and jumped into the air, slamming her feet down upon the slab of concrete jutting out of the elbow. The force of Maruko's blow speared the slab straight through the elbow, severing the golem's arm as it toppled to the ground. Landing back on the ground, Maruko followed up by kicking the slab right at Wolfram, who was preoccupied with shielding himself from the Slayer's assault. The slab stabbed right into the golem's midsection, forcing it backward while Wolfram grunted from the impact. With his opponent distracted, the Hellwalker jumped off the arm and barreled through the metal debris that protected Wolfram. The villain panicked as the Slayer closed the distance and landed on his armor, while Maruko avoided the falling shrapnel from the shield. The Doomslayer tore away the armor surrounding Wolfram's main body with his bare hands until a swarm of cables burst out of the golem and slithered towards the Slayer. But that's when he grabbed a sharpened piece of the armor and used it like a makeshift weapon, hacking apart the cables like he was slicing salami. After they had been hacked to pieces, the Slayer raised his fists and slammed them down against the armor, destroying it to reveal Wolfram, who suddenly surged forward and grabbed the unchained predator by the neck. "You little son of a bitch. I'm gonna enjoy popping your head like a zit." Wolfram grinned as his muscles bulged hideously as a purple glow emanated from his eyes. The Doomslayer merely dipped his head and glared at Wolfram in amusement as the villain tried to choke the life out of him. "Cute." The Slayer grabbed Wolfram's arm with both of his hands and squeezed so hard that snapped it in two. The villain screamed as the Slayer raised his fist, but the remaining hand of the golem grabbed the Doomslayer and slammed him down face first into the roof. Wolfram willed the golem to raise its hand and smash the vigilante until something struck him in the chest, and before he could register what it was, it burst into a blinding flame that seared his flesh. Aik. Wolfram hollered in agony as more projectiles collided into his body and lit him aflame, one striking him right in the eye. "Don't forget about me," Maruko shouted as she fired her flare launcher at Wolfram. The flares dug into his skin and burned brightly until his whole body was on fire. Maruko chucked away the spent launcher and jumped high into the air towards Wolfram, launching into a dragon kick that smashed into the villain's face, destroying most of his teeth and probably breaking his skull. She kicked him again in the face with her other leg and sent Wolfram teetering near the edge of the building as the force propelled her away from him. As she landed on the roof, a stream of missiles sailed past her and collided with Wolfram. A series of massive explosions detonated against him and finally causing the golem to topple over the edge. Maruko peeked behind her to see the Slayer armed with a smoking rocket launcher, looking no worse for wear after being swatted like a bug. It seemed like that armor of his could shrug off just about anything. Looking back at where the golem once was, Maruko surmised that the villain was probably defeated at last. Well, that takes care of him. Maruko wiped the sweat off her forehead as the great Slayer displaced his weapon. Now then, she started off as she walked right up towards the scourge of hell, without a hint of fear, and placed her hands on her hips as she glared up at him with a cocky smile. Let's talk about carting your crazy ass off to Tartarus. Hopefully, they'll have a cozy reinforced cell ready for you. She wasn't serious, was she? And what was this Tartarus she was talking about? Tartarus is the most heavily guarded maximum security penitentiary in the world. The prison was constructed to contain extremely dangerous villains that pose the utmost threat to society. And she thought a prison was going to hold him? He would break out of there in a heartbeat, but not before sending every one of those prisoners out of there in body bags. The Doomslayer stared down at Maruko as she continued to stare back at him as if she was expecting an answer. Seeing her defiant posture even while wounded and bleeding impressed the Slayer. She really did remind him of Emily. A loud disturbance alerted them. The pair shifted their attention to the left to see the golem climbing back up onto the tower with its remaining hand. Maruko sighed in annoyance. Hang back, murder-happy. I got this. She sprinted towards the clambering monster until another wave of cables erupted from the ground in front of it. But this time they were covered in rebar and coated in chunks of metal. But instead of dodging, Maruko ran straight toward them with a smirk, fully confident that she could handle them. What were a few more cuts and scrapes on her body? But before Maruko could deliver a swift kick to the cables, a hand grabbed her by the scruff of her leotard and yanked her back. Landing on the ground, she looked up to see the Doomslayer grab a cluster of cables while a few stray tentacles slammed against him. The rebar spikes broke against his unpenetrable predator suit. Hey! Maruko shouted at him, waving her fist in the air. I had that one. Idiot. Those spiked cables could have killed her, and she just charged in blindly like a bull. At least he knew when to dodge and when he could take a hit. What she did was borderline suicidal. The Slayer ripped off the cluster of cables and slammed them down on the ones attacking him before jumping out of the way when the golem regrew its right hand and slammed it down on the roof. The golem magnetically added more metal to its mass, becoming larger and more armored with sharpened protrusions sticking out of its metal coating. Wolfram was, shockingly enough, still alive in spite of his gruesome injuries. His skin was horribly burned and torn apart, exposing his oversized muscles. His right eye had been burned out, leaving a cauterized hole, while his broken arm hung limply with a bone sticking out. Wolfram looked positively feral, gnashing his teeth together as his remaining eye glowed brighter. Not only that, but the quirk amplification headset was undamaged. You little fucky ears this. Wolfram hatefully bellowed. I'm gonna rip your fucking bones out, smash them to splinters, and jam them into your fucking ears. Maruko raised an eyebrow. Overplaying it a little, isn't he? The Doomslayer said nothing as he glared at Wolfram. He could do worse. Island's Central Tower Ballroom. You guys all heard that, right? Denki shakingly asked as he gripped the wires, overcharging them with electricity. Try to focus, Kaminari. Ida snapped him back. I think you've almost got it. After recovering from watching the bloodbath that unfolded earlier, and after the vigilante had left the room, Class 1A immediately set to work on attempting to free the bound heroes. This was already proving to be almost fruitless as the bindings restricting the heroes were nigh unbreakable. That is until Momo hatched an idea. If they could overload the wires connected to the cables, they might be able to short-circuit them and free the rest of them. To start, Kirishima ripped up the center of the carpet and broke part of the bare floor with his hardening quirk, easily smashing the tiles with little effort. They managed to find some wires connected to the cables that were holding down All Might. Momo constructed a generator of her design that could amplify electric currents. After clipping a pair of jumper cables onto the wires, Denki grabbed another pair and started funneling his electricity into them. The current was channeled through the generator and fed into the jumpers connected to the wires on the floor, but with an enhanced charge to overload it. This was pushing Denki's quirk to his limit, as he was becoming dangerously close to exceeding his wattage limit and going into derp mode. While Momo and Ida oversaw Denki, Jiro attached her earphones to the wall in case she heard anyone coming towards the ballroom, acting as a lookout. Kirishima and Mineta were tending to a shell-shocked Bakugo who was sitting in a chair. Kirishima tried as best as he could to shake him out of it, but there was no reaction, just pure fear all over his face. There was no trace of the cocky, hot-headed explosive teen. It was almost darkly humorous. All of those times Bakugo yelled die at the top of his lungs without a care in the world, and then he gets to see what it's like to have someone actually die in front of him. Or rather pop like a balloon right next to him and shower him with blood and guts. I think it's working. Momo said when she saw the blue glow of the cables wrapped around All Might flickered with sparks. Just one more time, and you should be able to free him. Denki let out an exhausted groan before nearly sagging to his knees. If I go any further, I'll turn into a Dumbadash. Do not fear or curse your own limitations, Kaminari. All Might assured him with encouragement. You can overcome your hurdles as long as you focus on your goal and give it your all. Go beyond, plus ultra. Emboldened, Denki nodded and channeled all of his electrical power into the jumpers he was holding onto. All Might was proud of his students' determination, but he could tell that he and the others were barely holding it together. He could see the raw fear in their eyes. It would be a miracle if any of these youths wanted to continue their enrollment at UA High School. The amount of bloodshed this day was enough to make Yagi doubt his own words. Guys, I can hear people coming. Jiro warned her friends. Ida, Momo, Kirishima, and Mineta tensed up when they heard footsteps approaching the door, and they all prepared themselves. Denki focused everything he had into the jumpers until the cables holding down All Might short-circuit as it released him, but also fried the boy's brain in the process, non-fatally of course. All Might tore off the rest of his bindings and looked towards the doors just as they opened to reveal Izuku, Shoto, Uraraka, and Mirio. Guys, Midoriya exclaimed, overjoyed that his friends were okay. But his elation slowly vanished when he saw the bodies strewn about on the floor, more victims of the vigilantes' rampage. As his friends voiced their relief at seeing him again, Izuku's gaze focused on the seated, hunched-over form of his friend. In all of his life, Midoriya had never seen Bakugo this scared, ever. Sure, there was that one time when he saw fear on Katsuki's face during the sludge villain incident, but this was genuine trauma written all over his face. What happened to him? Midoriya asked his classmates. Jiro looked down at her feet, or rather the blood staining her clothes. Mineta twiddled his fingers together as he turned away while Kirishima swallowed the lump in his throat, averting his eyes towards the desiccated corpses in the room. Young Midoriya, All Might rushed over to his apprentice as Ida and Momo followed after him, the former carrying the now stupefied Denki. But then he and everyone else in the room noticed the unclothed Mirio, and they all looked away with a light blush. Mineta nearly barfed. Realizing this, Mirio grabbed a tablecloth from the floor, which was thankfully not covered in blood, and wrapped it around himself. Before All Might could ask Midoriya where Melissa was, all of the bindings that had captured the heroes suddenly deactivated and released them. All of the heroes picked themselves up, and many of them were ecstatic for being freed from their imprisonment. Freedom at last. Hirasho, concert, the #1 pro hero of Russia laughed. That must have been Melissa. Izuku realized. She managed to deactivate the security system. Wait, so if someone was already going to turn the security off then? Kyoka trailed off as she looked at the babbling simpleton that was Denki. Momo's sweat dropped as her friend gave her a thumbs up, giggling absent-mindedly. An ear-splitting rumble rocked the room, nearly throwing everybody off their feet and sending tiles from the ceiling falling on top of them. They all heard an enraged roar from above, followed by more rumbling and the sounds of an oversized shotgun being fired. Elecplant, the #2 pro hero of North America, clenched his fists. Quickly, everyone, to the roof. Wait! All Might suddenly exclaimed, holding out his hand as the overseas heroes immediately halted. We need to ensure the safety of the hostages. They have no idea where to go, and if this tower collapses, they won't have time to escape. We need to protect them. The heroes present looked confused. What about that armored psychopath? They couldn't just let him have free reign of the place. They had to apprehend him. Midoriya silently agreed with his mentor's plan, but knew that there was another reason. He was reaching his limit. Izuku could see small wisps of steam coming from the nape of his neck, and there was no telling when he would forcibly revert to his previous state. Mirio knew it too, but Izuku didn't know that. Luckily for All Might, the heroes understood his reasoning. He's right. Salam, the #1 pro-hero of Egypt, agreed rather theatrically. The lives of innocent people are always a first priority. Quickly, close friends and allies. We have no time to waste. The walking pictogram sped straight out of the room due to his quirk, making him paper-thin, while several heroes followed after him. Kirishima and Mineta ushered Bakugo out of the room, though they still had to guide the unresponsive boy out the room. As the rest of Izuku's friends and the heroes vacated the room, Izuku went towards the opposite door. I need to go find Melissa so we can find someplace where the civilians will be safe. She's going to get in contact with pro-hero teams on their way here right now. Izuku said to All Might, the only occupant in the room. Yagi felt a sense of hope rise from within. It seemed that the end was finally in sight. Good. I'll go ensure everyone's safe. As they both headed for their respective exits, All Might suddenly stopped. Young Midoriya. Izuku halted halfway out the door and turned to All Might. The symbol of peace glanced at the corpses and gore decorating the walls before giving Izuku an apologetic look. I didn't think that things could escalate like this. Neither did any of us. Izuku solemnly answered as he hung his head. After a few seconds, they exited the room, leaving behind the dead bodies of those unlucky enough to cross paths with the blood-maddened vigilante. A few miles away from my island. We're almost there, everybody. Better get yourselves prepared. Tiger said over his shoulder as he steered his rescue boat while inside the cabin. A distance away from his right, the other boat traveled alongside him, which was piloted by Mandalay. Each of the boats carried a dozen or so heroes. Every one of them was preparing themselves for whatever was on Island, but if the scent of death and rot in the air was any indication, it was going to be bad. I'm telling you, villains were leaving the island not long ago. My quirk is never wrong. Ragdoll told Eraserhead. I'm not doubting you, but we need to focus on the bigger picture. Our top priority is to secure Island. We'll get the escapees another time. Eraserhead reminded her. But what is your plan for apprehending the vigilante? Yoroi Musha, the samurai hero, inquired as he stroked his beard. If that armor of his could withstand Endeavor's hell flames, he won't be easy to subdue. Simple, we'll knock him out. Midnight answered slyly with a wave of her finger. If we can hold him down and take off his helmet, I can hit him with Somnambulist, and then we got him in a bag. You're positive it'll work against him? Ectoplasm asked. I'll be using an enhanced formula. I've been honing my quirk for years, so I'm able to alter the potency of my fumes. The one I'll be using on him is strong enough to instantly put an entire herd of elephants to sleep. Midnight explained, some of the heroes nodding in agreement to her plan. Some of them looked towards Island at the pillar of smoke spawned from the explosion earlier. Tiger, are you sure that dash? Gran Torino began to ask before Tiger cut him off. For the 100th time, the Geiger counter isn't picking anything up, and yes, it's working just fine. Tiger tiredly repeated. Then again, even he wasn't exactly sure how that was possible. Do you know for certain he doesn't have a quirk? Edshot questioned Eraserhead. I'm not exactly sure yet, but we all think that suit of his might have something to do with it. Eraserhead answered as he pondered on the subject of the vigilante. The real question is, who is he and where did he get his hands on such powerful technology? You can ask him when we throw him in the deepest, darkest, most reinforced cell in Tartarus. Snatch told him as he kept his eyes on Island. Everyone, someone's contacting us. Patching it through to you now. Came the excited voice of Mandalay over the boat's radio. All at once, the heroes piled into the cabin and crowded around Tiger, who pressed a button to activate the speakers. Hello? This is Melissa Shield from Island. Can anyone hear me? It was the voice of a young girl. Her tone of voice was shaken and rife with fear. We do. This is Tiger of the Wild Pussycats. The hero answered her, picking up the transceiver as the other heroes were elated to finally hear someone from the island. The Pussycats? That pro-hero team? Oh, thank God. Just hang tight. There are 2 boats crammed with heroes on the way to Island. We'll take care of everything, kid. Just leave it to us. Tiger said proudly. There was a long silence on the other end. I don't think that'll make a difference. He's already killed them all. Everyone gasped. In that instant, they all assumed the worst. The hostages were dead. It was like they had all been doused with ice-cold water. Everyone looked at the radio in shock as their mouths hung open. And it wasn't just them. The other heroes on the second rescue boat heard it as well. "No," Samintas whispered as he backed away, his stony hands trembling. "I knew it." Snatch angrily cursed as he punched the wall. Eraserhead felt like he was about to throw up as his worst fears were realized. How was he going to tell the families of the students he swore to protect? How was he going to tell them that he failed them? There was also another chilling possibility for everyone. Were All Might and the other heroes a part of the body count as well? "You mean, all of the hostages are dead?" Tiger hesitantly asked. "What? No, the hostages are alive. All of them. They are," Tiger exclaimed. Everyone was dumbstruck at the announcement. "Yes. They're all being held at the main airport, and All Might is leading the rest of them to safety with the other heroes." The sounds of cheering came from both of the boats as the heroes celebrated the fantastic news. After hours and hours of fearing the worst, they were exultant to hear that there were no innocent civilian or hero casualties. It was just the morale boost they needed after getting half of them pummeled by an insane vigilante, watching him slaughter the Sabres on live television before setting off an earth-shaking explosion. "Did ya hear? They're okay. Your students are alive." Present Mike laughed excitedly as he shook Aizawa's shoulders before hugging him. Shota could only utter a chuckle as he genuinely smiled, going a little bit weak at the knees over the confirmation that his students were alive. Midnight folded her arms as a light flush was visible on her cheeks. It was rare to see Aizawa crack a smile, and even she had to admit she was just as elated as he was. But then a thought came to her. What did that girl mean earlier about everyone being dead? The R-rated heroine walked up to the radio and motioned Tiger to hand her the receiver. "Miss Shield, this is Midnight. When you said, 'He's already killed them all,' what exactly did you mean if the hostages are okay?" "I meant the Steel Sabres. They're all dead. Every one of them. There are bodies everywhere. Oh my God." Everyone looked at each other, startled. Did they just hear all of that right? The entire organization was dead? It was shockingly hard to believe, but after all of the gunfire and explosions they heard earlier, it didn't seem to be an exaggeration. Their eyes cast down at the floor, nobody knew what to feel. The Steel Sabres deserved to be captured, dragged in front of a judge, and put away in prison for the rest of their lives. Not butchered like animals. But there was one big question on everybody's minds. Should they feel glad that the Sabres were dead? Should they feel elation since their reign of terror upon heroes had been brought to an end? "Melissa, I've got your father. We need to go," came the voice of a boy on the radio. "Midoriya?" Aizawa blinked. "Okay. The hostages are being held at the main airport. All Might and the others will be there. Good luck." And the radio went dead before anyone could answer. Hawks peered over the side of the boat and called out to the others. "You guys should probably get out here and check this out." Everyone either stepped out of the cabin or looked out its windows to see a dark, purple haze on Eye Island's central tower. They could see some massive shape swinging its arms around, while angry roars came from the creature. "What the hell is happening today?" Snipe grumbled in annoyance. Hawks narrowed his eyes at the top of the building. Maruko had to be up there, but he wanted to confirm it first. He turned to Ragdoll. "Tomoko, can you get a lock up there?" "Can do." Ragdoll cheerily posed. She glared at the tower and activated her search quirk. "Okay, that huge rock monster thing is definitely a villain. And I can sense Maruko. She's banged up and fighting him." Kigo's mouth formed a thin line. Hopefully, his friend could hang in there just a bit longer. "What about the vigilante? Can you search him out?" 13 the space heroine asked. "Gimme a sec." Ragdoll replied, focusing hard. "Got him. He's dash." In that instant, time froze for Tomoko. It was like she was turned into a statue, unable to move at all. Her whole world went dark and the most absolutely horrific visions assaulted her mind. She found herself falling through a deep pit with flames circling her, the sheer heat completely unfathomable. Then, a mass of tentacles with stingers at the end wrapped around her and dragged her further into the flames. She was flung down face first into a pile of dismembered bodies, blood splashing against her face as she managed to regain her footing and crawl away from the pile. She looked around and found herself in a nightmarish hellscape, a barren, rocky wasteland with emaciated corpses impaled on stakes with rivers of lava flowing in the background. An inhuman screech filled the air and Ragdoll turned around to find herself face to face with an army of the most horrendous creatures imaginable. Nearly every one of them had razor-sharp teeth, hooked claws, towered over the others, had weapons grafted to their arms, soulless eyes radiating utter hatred, conjured fire from their palms, and one of them was a literal floating meatball with teeth. With a roar, the monsters converged on her and Ragdoll braced herself for the inevitable until a bright green orb collided with the horde, the force of the explosion throwing her backward and nearly blinding her. She could feel more blood splattering against her like a tidal wave, covering her cheery costume in crimson fluids. She looked up from where she lay and saw the vigilante, standing upon a literal mountain of the disemboweled monsters, clutching a giant cannon that was bigger than he was in one hand, while brandishing some kind of energy sword that glowed blood red with runes etched along the blade. The fires began to surround them, getting hotter with every passing second, and engulfed her right up until the vigilante glared back at her with emotionless, hate-filled eyes that bored into her very soul. Ragdoll screamed, snapping herself out of her vision as she clutched the sides of her head in agony. Ragdoll. Tiger balked as the other heroes jerked at her sudden screaming. Ragdoll collapsed to the floor, writhing and flailing as she continued to scream as her throat went raw. The heroes immediately tried to hold her down as she thrashed around in their grip. Ragdoll continued to scream her lungs out. Her pupils were like pinpricks as she struggled with the heroes restraining her while kicking out with her legs. What the hell is wrong with her? Hold her still. Calm down, Tomoko. It came from hell. It came from Heliel. Ragdoll shrilled as tears ran down her cheeks, her fingers digging into her skin until they drew blood. She's out of her mind, Namuri. Give her something. Snipe yelled to Midnight. The heroine tore off a tiny piece of the thin fabric covering her hand and quickly held down Ragdoll before pressing her hand up against the panicking woman's nose. Shoo, shhh, it's okay. Just breathe it in. Everything's going to be okay. Midnight whispered as gently as she could as Ragdoll's squirming subsided. Her eyes fluttered as she finally lost consciousness, going limp in Midnight's arms. Everyone stared at the unconscious girl, rattled at what had just transpired before them. What was that? Present Mike breathed, disturbed to the core. Guys, I heard Ragdoll screaming over there. What's going on? Pixie Bob shouted over the radio. Hawks faced the central tower and balled his hands up into fists, his mind finally made up. He didn't know what had happened to Ragdoll, but that vigilante had something to do with it, and Maruko was up there with him. And there was no way he was going to sit around and wait while his friend was in peril. With a flap of his wings, Hawks launched himself off the boat. You guys go protect the civilians at the airport. I'm going on ahead. Hawks said to Ryukyu before taking off into the air and flying towards Island. Hawks, wait. We don't know what's going on up there. Hawks. Ryukyu called after him, but he was already out of sight. Hawks shot toward the tower like a bullet, going as fast as his wings could carry him. He was getting Maruko out of there and as far away from that psycho as possible. But after what happened with Ragdoll, Hawks couldn't fathom what that man was capable of. What are you? Hawks muttered to himself. To be continued. Chapter 19. Hidden Depths. Island's central tower rooftop. The repeated swings of Wolfram's fists forced the Doomslayer and Maruko to dive out of the way as the impacts left craters along the roof. Wolfram clenched his golem's right fist, and it sprouted rebar's rods along its fingers, shooting at the pair with a deadly hailstorm of sharpened steel. Mirko swerved and ducked around the implements in a blur of superhuman acrobatics, while the Slayer shrugged off the rebars bouncing off his armor while he blew away the unarmored cables with his super shotgun. For the armored ones, he resorted to one-shotting them with his bare fists. How many fucking cables was this tower filled with? Wolfram then switched to another form of attack. The golem's shoulders morphed into a pair of cannons aimed right at them. The cannons fired their payload at them. Non-explosive shells filled to the brim with shrapnel and scattered the duo, destroying a large section of the rooftop in the process. The burst of razor-sharp metal pieces forced Maruko to seek cover amid the uprooted rubble as one errant blade sailed over her ears, nearly taking them off and forcing her to fold them. The Slayer was caught up in the collapsing portion of the roof, and he ran up the falling slab, double jumping back onto the roof before Wolfram transformed his left arm into a giant drill and thrust it at the Hellwalker. He was knocked out of the sky and driven into the roof as the drill ground against him. But the Doomslayer gripped the drill with his bare hands, stopping its motion and tearing it off in an inhuman display of strength. As Wolfram drew his hand back in shock, the Doomslayer hurled the drill at the golem's right shoulder cannon and destroyed it along with its arm, just as he instantly drew his rocket launcher and fired a missile at the other shoulder cannon. The payload sailed directly into the barrel and exploded as soon as it reached the end. As the cannon crumbled off of the golem, the Slayer noticed Maruko staring at him with an awestruck expression. "Geez, I'll have whatever you're smoking." Maruko found her voice as she cracked a smile. Flynn never did smoke. The last thing he needed was lung cancer. Of course, being a demigod gave him immunity from any disease, but still. "You little shits are like cockroaches." Wolfram's smug insult caught the two's attention and turned towards the madman. "You just don't know when to stand still and die." A swarm of cables replaced his missing arm until it formed into a giant lamprey appendage with a suction-like mouth lined with rebar rods as its teeth. Then, he created a massive cutlass in his other hand using pieces of his armor with his quirk. To say that Wolfram looked imposing would be a colossal understatement. Maruko's eye twitched as she bared her teeth. "I am so fucking sick of this guy." She seethed. The Doomslayer frowned. "Ditto. Wolfram's power is increasing, and he is dangerously close to breaching the vault. He frowned deeper. That, and they were starting to run out of roof to stand on. Wolfram prepared to attack with his lamprey arm, but then a flurry of feathers came from the sky and swarmed all over the arms, slicing it to pieces. "Huh." Wolfram grunted as the feathers flew back up into the clouds, and a blur shot downwards towards the golem and cut straight through its sword like a hot knife through butter. "What the?" The unseen figure flew past the Doomslayer and Maruko, perching itself on a pile of rubble behind it as it unfurled its red plumage to reveal the pair's surprise ally, the wing hero Hawks. "Kigo!" Maruko exclaimed with elation as the Slayer charged towards Wolfram, not giving a rat's ass about Hawks. "Call me fashionably late." Hawks charismatically boasted as he tapped his feather katana against his shoulder. His smile faded when he saw the sorry, bloodied state Maruko was in. She looked like she was using all of her willpower to stand upright. Why did she have to keep punishing herself like this? "I know what you're going to say, so save it." Maruko rudely interrupted. "We need to take that villain down. He's wearing some kind of headband that supercharges his quirk. Another genius invention of Eye Island he probably stole." Hawk sarcastically drawled. His expression turned serious when he noticed the vigilante shooting Wolfram with his rocket launcher, the villain blocking the explosives with his construct's free hand. Kigo tensed up when he remembered the river of blood on his flight through the island. The vigilante was responsible for it all. "So what's his story?" "Believe it or not, he's been helping me fight this guy," Maruko revealed. Kigo raised an eyebrow at Maruko, seemingly thinking she was fibbing. "You think that's crazy? Listen to this. When I found the hostages at the airport, they claimed he saved their lives." Hawks almost let his jaw drop. "He saved them? That couldn't be right. This maniac pulverized several pro-heroes, blew up half of Eye Island, slaughtered God knows how many mercenaries, turned Ragdoll into a gibbering headcase when she scanned him, and he managed to protect innocent lives before professional heroes could? Well, that's not going to give him a free pass." He remarked. "We'll deal with him later after we stop the villain?" "Yeah, good luck with that." Maruko muttered under her breath, knowing full well that even she couldn't beat him. That was enough to give Kigo pause. He always knew Rumi as someone who never backed down when facing a strong opponent and ran towards danger head first. But to hear her voice doubt and uncertainty. The Doomslayer jumped out of the way when Wolfram swung his fist at him, while several smaller arms made of metal shards with serrated fingers shot out of its left side and swarmed the Slayer. They engulfed his body, scratching and clawing at his suit in an attempt to tear it off, but to no avail. The Slayer responded by pulling out a grenade. He yanked off the pin and the detonation destroyed the hands, giving him some breathing room, but not before another mass of hands surged towards him only to be sliced into ribbons when Hawks sent a wave of feathers at them. The Doomslayer leaped into the fray as Hawks dive-bombed Wolfram and delivered large gashes on Wolfram's armor, while Maruko bounded all over the area, occasionally taking potshots at Wolfram to keep him distracted. Wolfram was pelted with blows from Maruko's kicks and slashes from Hawk's sword. The only thing he could do now defended himself as best he could, but then he saw the Slayer moving in. Wolfram summoned a burst of steel columns at him, and though the Hellwalker did jump over most of them, one column blindsided him, and he was sent sailing off the tower. The Doomslayer gritted his teeth in annoyance, but then he landed on something oddly soft. Looking down, he had safely landed atop a circular platform made from red feathers floating in midair. The feathers started to form a stairway that led him back up to the roof, and he ran up the makeshift stairs without pause. He made it back up to the roof where the stairs led him near Wolfram just as Hawks flew up next to the Slayer. "You're welcome," Kigo teasingly said to him. The Doomslayer ignored him and picked up the pace, leaving him behind. "Good talk." He sweat dropped. Truth be told, Hawks had his reservations about saving the vigilante beforehand, but he needed to learn more about this nutcase, and he couldn't do that if he got tuned into pavement pizza. He would assist him in the fight and stall him long enough for the heroes to arrive and subdue him. Hopefully. Jumping off the feather stairway, the Doomslayer landed on the golem's shoulder and fired his rocket launcher at the last remaining bits of armor around him. At the same time, Hawks recalled all of his feathers back and formed his katana into a large, bladed glaive and flung it at the right arm. The glaive severed the golem's hand while Maruko leaped towards the giant's midsection and thrust both of her feet into its metallic stone surface with enough force to literally break the golem in half. Wolfram toppled over forward as the Slayer jumped off of his shoulder and landed a few feet away from him, soon joined by Hawks and Maruko. Wolfram willed his golem to pick itself up by forming pieces of metal around the area into spindly, insectoid legs. The Doomslayer aimed his rocket launcher at Wolfram, but Maruko charged toward the villain, blocking the Slayer's shot. Luna Drill. She launched into another flying dropkick, but rotated her body around until she spun like a drill. The villain was right in her sights, and she sailed through the air like a missile towards him, but a twisted smile formed on Wolfram's lips and rebars stuck out from the golem. Hawks and the Slayer saw this, and they made a break towards the villain to stop him, but it was too late. The rebars shot out of the golem and hurled towards Maruko. Hawks quickly flung out his feathers at them like they were throwing knives, and was successful in deflecting the rebars away from Maruko. But not all of them. The first rebar speared itself into her right foot. 2 impaled themselves into her left knee and thigh. The third and fourth shot into her left arm. 2 more were shot through her left shoulder and collarbone. The final rebar stabbed into the right side of her hip, just barely missing her major internal organs. Searing pain shot through Maruko's body as she coughed up a wad of blood, roughly tumbling across the debris-laden roof where she screamed in agony. The Doomslayer froze, his eyes widening. As Wolfram cackled victoriously, Hawks flew over to Maruko and tried to help his writhing friend who bled profusely. The Doomslayer was motionless where he stood, staring at the mangled form of Maruko. As his irises shrunk, his eardrums bombarded by Maruko's pained screams, his mind went back to an event that seemed disturbingly familiar to the scene before him. The day when he lost everything. Earth Sun Valley, Idaho. Many eons ago. Greyk. Flynn Taggart roared as he smashed the butt of his shotgun into the face of an imp. The force of the blow nearly caved in its skull as it crumpled to the ground and had its windpipe crushed when Flynn stomped on its throat. Whirling around, Taggart fired at the incoming imps, blasting chunks out of their bodies as the fires raged around him. Running out of shells, Flynn ducked to avoid the green fireball launched from the hand of a Hell Knight and unslung his chain gun from his back. He unloaded his weapon into the demon's legs, ripping them off in a hail of bullets and causing it to topple to the pavement. It struggled to stand, but Taggart was already upon the creature, perforating its head apart with his chain gun as he unleashed his war cry. Hearing a snarl behind him, he peered over his shoulder and barely dodged a charging Pinky. Flynn rolled over to his side and pulled the trigger, only to realize his chain gun had run dry. The Pinky charged at him with his maw wide open, and Flynn threw his chain gun away, drawing his rocket launcher that was holstered to his right leg. He launched a rocket at the charging demon, and it sailed right into its open mouth. The resulting explosion scattered its entrails across the area and painted most of it and Taggart's face red. As Flynn wiped the blood off of his face, he suddenly noticed flames forming around his feet. Realizing what it was, he ducked behind a burning tree just as a gout of flames erupted where he once stood. Sauntering out of the flames of the forest was an archvile, blood oozing around its enlarged palms as it used its dark magic to resurrect its dead brethren. As the previously deceased demons reformed themselves like they were made of clay, Taggart dove from behind the tree and aimed his BFG at the horde, his teeth clenched with contempt. The archvile had no time to retaliate as the green plasma orb engulfed it and the other demons in a tremendous explosion, liquefying the flesh off of their bones and reducing them to ash. With his enemies dead and no other hellspawn in the area, Flynn nearly dropped his BFG as he breathed heavily. This was a fucking nightmare. After killing that giant mecha spider back in hell, and after leaving through the portal, he found himself back on Earth, believing that he had finally won and his home was safe. Oh, how wrong he was. The demons had invaded the entire planet, killing billions on their warpath and setting whole countries on fire. He realized that his wife and child, along with their family pet, were in danger, and he raced to their home in Idaho, praying that they were safe. He had managed to find transportation that could get him there until he was forced to travel by foot the rest of the way. When he finally reached Sun Valley, the lush forests and mountains were ablaze while the whole town had been slaughtered by the demons. The smoke from the burning trees stung his eyes, as did everything else. His light green armor was almost falling apart due to the damage it sustained. His pants were a tattered mess, he lost his helmet, and he was covered in burns and claw marks. Anybody else in his situation would collapse, but Flynn had to find his family. Emily was a tough and resourceful woman. If anything, she could have already evacuated and left a note for him. They had to be alive, they had to be. Running down the street, he spotted his mailbox up ahead and picked up the pace. Dread gripped his heart when the sight of his burning home came into view. Every inch of it was ablaze along with the garage and tool shed. No. Flynn shook his head in denial as he bolted down the dirt road that led up to the conflagration that used to be his family's abode. Emily, Billy, Daisy, where are you? His breathing was frantic as he ran around to the backyard. His mind was close to snapping in two. He rounded the corner of his house and saw the unspeakable. He fell to his knees. Island's Central Tower rooftop. Present day. Doom 2016, at Doom's Gate. Ha 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 ha. Wolfram laughed as he attracted more metal onto his golem and began to reshape himself until he looked like a giant scorpion made of sharpened steel and jagged debris. Now it's time to give you a dirt nap 6 feet under. He thrust his stinger at the heroes. Hawks spread out his wings like a shield to protect Maruko while creating another feather sword in his hands. Just as he was about to slice off the stinger heading towards him, a green blur darted in front of him and grabbed the needle-like hunk of steel with one hand. Maruko, despite the horrific pain she was in, opened one eye and saw the vigilante standing in front of Hawks, his one hand gripping the large stinger. Scowling, Wolfram tried to yank his stinger away but soon realized he couldn't. It didn't budge an inch. Hawks blinked in confusion as Maruko tried to sit herself up, despite her pin-cushioned state. But that's when everyone froze when they felt something wash over them. It was like they had been skinned alive and then thrown into a pit full of hot coals. It was originating from the vigilante, who stood motionless with his head lowered and his other hand clenched into a trembling fist. Wolfram broke out into a cold sweat as the vigilante slowly lifted his face to glare at Wolfram. The villain saw the man's eyes and nearly shat his drawers. It was almost as if he was face to face with some kind of inhuman being that towered over him. The Slayer's eyes were one of pure, unrestrained, unmerciful, unforgiving rage. 041. The scourge of hell tore off the stinger and clubbed the golem across its body before throwing it away and grabbing its razor-sharp pincers and ripping them off with ease. He took advantage of the terrified villain by jumping toward the metal scorpion Wolfram was perched upon and slamming his fist into the creature, shattering it into pieces instantly. The Hellwalker grabbed Wolfram by the throat and flung him away from the remains of his golem, right next to Hawks and Maruko. The Berserk Slayer hopped off the rubble and barreled towards Wolfram, who tried to summon metal to protect himself only to have his organs explode when the Slayer stomped on his stomach. 053. As Wolfram vomited blood, the enraged doomslayer grabbed him by his collarbones, his fingers tearing through the villain's skin and gripping the bones, and headbutt him. The force of the impact was like getting hit by a steel girder. Wolfram howled in pain as he felt his skull shatter, but the doomslayer furiously headbutt him again. And again, and again, and again, and again. The doomslayer kept bashing his head against Wolfram's face over and over, much to the shock and horror of Hawks and Maruko, the former moving as close as he could to her protectively. Teeth, bits of skull, blood, and broken pieces of the quirk amplification headset scattered everywhere as the Slayer continued his berserker fury, tearing up Wolfram's flesh and exposing his broken skull while his mangled face looked like a dropped pie. The Doomslayer reared his head back as far as he could and slammed his head into Wolfram so hard that the villain's skull exploded. Wolfram's body went limp as blood poured from whatever was left of his head as the headset clattered to the ground, fully destroyed. The Great Slayer stood up as he let go of Wolfram's corpse, his helmet covered in blood and brain matter which dribbled off of his visor. Hawks and Maruko were left speechless. None of them dared move until the vigilante whipped his head over towards them, his focus mainly on Maruko. He suddenly marched over towards them with a threatening, blood-drenched posture. Hawks wasn't taking any chances, and he erected a barrier made of feathers that formed in front of Maruko while he created 2 feather daggers in his hands. Higo's heart pounded as the vigilante drew nearer, having not forgotten how the vigilante pulverized him the last time. Hawks knew the maniac's armor was virtually indestructible, but maybe his visor could be damaged in some way. He flapped his wings, sending a plume of feathers at the vigilante to blind him while he darted to the right. The Doomslayer swatted the feathers aside just as Hawks closed the gap and thrust his dagger at his visor, only to have the blade snap off as soon as it connected. Hawks paled as the vigilante snatched him by the scruff of his shirt and flung him into a flat outcropping of debris, knocking him out when his forehead banged against the concrete. He walked up to the feathered wall separating him from Maruko and tore it away like it was made of cardboard. Maruko gritted her teeth as the vigilante towered over her bloody form. Guessing that this man was going to finish her off, Rumi glared up at him in defiance to deny him the satisfaction of finishing off a weakened heroine. To her surprise, however, the vigilante scooped her up in his arms as gently as he could as to not drive the rebars in any further. This caused her no amount of pain as she tried her hardest to stifle a scream as blood steadily dripped from her wounds and stained the vigilante's armor. The Doomslayer deeply grimaced as he looked down at the squirming, bleeding form of Maruko. In his vision, the woman in his arms kept flip-flopping between Rumi and Emily. It drove him nuts to no end. Maruko is in critical condition. Medical attention is required. I have scanned the building and located a med lab in David Shield's office on the 14th floor. Proceed to the waypoint on your HUD immediately. The Doomslayer ran towards the destroyed portion of the roof and jumped down the hole, landing 5 floors down into a hallway where he kicked away the debris blocking his path. He sprinted down the halls with the wounded heroine in his arms, his mind solely focused on helping her. But unbeknownst to him, he was being watched. From outside the windows he was running past, there were multiple figures on the roof of one of the buildings watching him run by. 4 figures sitting atop 4 horses. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, demigod enforcers of the eternal balance and punishers of the wicked who dare threaten it. Death, the leader of the riders, was a gaunt figure with deathly pale skin, scraggly black hair, and eyes that glowed a dull orange. He wore a featureless mask made of bone that perfectly captured the title bestowed upon him. The lower portion of his body was dressed in bone marrow-like armor and dark blue rags, while his upper body was bare, showing off his muscled yet lanky body. Death's weapon was an oversized scythe known as Harvester that could split into 2 handheld sickles. His steed was a ghoulish, skeletal horse with rotting features that made it look like it was an undead revenant. Its mane, tail, and hooves were aglow with green energy, and its name summed up its appearance well: despair. War was a psychically intimidating warrior dressed in heavy armor with a red rood covering his head. He appeared human, but his white hair and ghostly eyes were an indicator of how otherworldly he and his siblings were. Slung across his back was Chaos Eater, a sword with monstrous faces carved into the blade and was large enough to cleave a building in half. He sat atop his steed, Ruin, a massive horse with coal-like skin, fire dancing around its hooves, and glowing red runes etched into its hide. Fury was the only female of the group with a vicious mean streak a billion miles wide. Her shapely form was dressed in light armor befitting her mean-spirited nature. Her violet hair flowed in the wind, while her pupilless white eyes made her look both beautiful and intimidating. Her main weapon, Scorn, was wrapped around her waist and was capable of transforming into a variety of destructive implements, though she preferred to keep it in its whip configuration. Rampage was the name of her steed, a sleek stallion with jet-black skin and stripes on its body resembling lightning bolts. Its mane crackled with electricity, yet it still kept a graceful feel to it. The final horseman was Strife, and his appearance differed quite greatly from the rest. Whereas War, Death, and Fury resembled ancient warriors, Strife looked like a cowboy from the Dark Ages. His body was covered in armor that resembled a Kevlar vest with an ammo belt slung around it, and wore a belt with a skull emblazoned upon the buckle. He wore a silver helmet that covered his face, leaving what he looked like unknown. His eyes were illuminated yellow while his spiky dark hair poked out the back of his helmet. His signature weapons were a pair of firearms in his holsters, Mercy, a black quad-barreled pistol, and Redemption, a white engraved revolver. His steed Mayhem was covered in armor and wore a ghastly helmet with steam visibly rising from its nostrils. Its skin was fair-colored, yet its hair and tail were dirty, unkempt, and mossy. So the myth was real this entire time. War remarked. The doomslayer was not some demonic superstition after all. Perhaps we should not have dismissed the Helix Stone so easily back then. Regardless of that matter, his sudden appearance in the mortal realm appears to be connected to that burst of energy we felt nary a few days ago. Death said, his voice raspy. But what purpose does he have here? Beside wiping out those hero killers? Strife pointed out the obvious. Who knows? None of us are clairvoyant. We mostly leave that sort of stuff up to the Ascendant realm. I doubt even they know what to do with him. His actions here don't seem to cause disorder, at least not yet. Fury answered him. If anything, he did this world a great service by annihilating the steel sabers. Death looked down at the river of blood below. War sneered. Paid for every life they took. This is retribution at its purest. Quite. Fury agreed with a sadistic grin. She relished watching those hired guns being brutally ripped apart by the Bane of Hell himself. You know, we could offer him the chance of becoming the fifth horseman. Hey, Strife suddenly exclaimed, pointing at Fury. That position's still open for Ulthane. He's yet to make his choice. Fury reminded him. He'll come around. Strife waved his hand. I have a feeling the Doomslayer would respectfully decline that offer. War dryly commented, earning an annoyed look from Fury. I believe the best course of action is to not approach him unless it's deemed necessary. I concur. Death nodded. We are returning to the Basilica to consult with the Eternal Balance. I was thinking we could stay here a little longer to watch him beat up those heroes who'll try to nab him. Strife snickered. Fury raised an eyebrow at him while War and Death looked at him blankly. Without a word, the two horsemen turned their horses around and headed towards a flowing, green and white portal that materialized behind them. Oh right, I'm just the plucky comic relief. My opinions don't mean squat. Strife groused sarcastically. You know, some of us do enjoy your witty banter. Fury assured, smiling slyly. Strife rolled his eyes in response, but knew his sister long enough to know that she meant what she said. The two Nephilim followed their bothers into the portal where it closed, leaving nobody on Eye Island the wiser. Eye Island's central tower bottom floor lobby. Is that everyone? All Might asked Elecplant, trying his hardest to maintain his muscled form. We're getting the last of them down now, as we speak. Elecplant answered, just as the rest of the hostages were ferried down via Mr. Plastic's quirk. A while ago, the rest of the heroes had caught up with the panicking partygoers and safely guided them down to the ground floor by using each of their varied quirks to get them down as fast as possible. They had successfully got everyone down in the main atrium, but the hardest part was trying to calm them down and have their eyes averted from the dead bodies in the room. Meanwhile, Class 1A was located in another part of the room, fixated on the bloody symbol on the wall. Holy shit, what the hell is this? Kirishima whispered to his friends. Is this guy some sort of devil worshipper or something? Mineta gulped, beads of sweat rolling down his face. I don't think he is. Momo said. If he was, we should be seeing pentagrams. This looks more like a traditional cross. I'm not exactly well versed on religion, but I don't think crosses are supposed to look like that. Ida confessed, just as scared as the others. Izuku, Uraraka, Shoto, Mirio, Bakugu, and Jiro were staring at the message written in blood under the symbol. Rip and tear. Izuku had never experienced such chilling unease before in his life. It was like he was staring at a bad omen, a curse or a warning that could spell doom or ruin. Something the vigilante personified. But why would he scrawl something like this? To intimidate? To scare? To warn? To taunt? There were so many questions in Midoriya's head it was giving him a painful migraine. Why was all of this happening? He wanted this to stop so bad that he was close to sinking to his knees and crying. But he had to stay strong until this was over. His eyes eventually found their way over to Bakugu, who was staring at the symbol. Izuku swallowed a lump in his throat when he noticed a glint of Bakugu's trademark explosive temper in his frightened eyes. He remembered Kirishima telling him how the vigilante ran straight past him while on the way down to the bottom floor. Izuku was well aware of his friend's massive inferiority complex and his inability to let things slide. Bakugu was never going to let what happened between him and the vigilante go. He just hoped that Bakugu wouldn't get permanently crippled if he was ever insane enough to try to fight that madman one-on-one. But Midoriya started to reconsider calling the vigilante a madman. He did not forget how he saved them from that villain's attack back on the roof earlier, but it still didn't explain his excessively violent behavior. His internal conflict was interrupted when Cow Lady, the number 3 pro hero of North America, went up to them appearing concerned. All right, young-uns. Let's get you back on over with the others. Y'all don't need to be seeing this. The cowgirl heroine ushered as she led the group away from the sigil. The teens were led back to the civilians and stood near Melissa, who nursed her still unconscious father next to the WMD, and Denki, who was beginning to recover from his short circuit. Everyone, if I can have your attention for one moment, All Might announced, garnering everyone's attention. We will be evacuating all of you to the main airport, where you will be safely evacuated by heroes arriving from the mainland. I need all of you to stick together in one big group while we escort you over to the airport. Stay close to us, and we'll get you to safety as quickly as we can. This gave the stressed-out civvies some much-needed comfort. After all, who would be more suited to giving a reassuring speech than the symbol of peace himself? They all formed a group with heroes guarding them at all sides and hurried towards the blown-open main entrance. As All Might led the group, he spared a glance at Nine's body on the floor and grimaced. It did not have to end this way. They all exited through the entrance, and everyone stopped dead in their tracks at the horrific sight before them. A literal lake of blood stretching on for miles with flaming wreckage and disemboweled corpses scattered everywhere. The heroes and civilians could only stare in horror at the bloody madness before them. The partygoers began openly screaming or crying, holding each other while some emptied the contents of their stomach onto the ground. Class 1A wasn't faring any better either. Their minds completely snapped. It broke them, sinking to their knees as their mouths hung open. No, 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 no fucking way, man. Denki clutched the sides of his head and tears welled up in his eyes. The pro heroes were just as horrified as the teens. They had been through many ordeals during their careers as professional crime fighters, natural disasters, dangerous villains, and harrowing rescues, to name a few. Through all of those hardships, they learned and grew from each experience, becoming better heroes in the process. But this was something they had never experienced before in their lives. Madre de Dios. El Magnifico Matador, the number 1 pro hero of Spain, whispered in fear as he performed the sign of the cross. All Might was so horrified at what he was seeing, he almost powered down on the spot. This was beyond what he could comprehend. All of this was a million times worse than whatever All for One could do. It almost made whatever his nemesis did in the past look tame compared to the carnage before him. While he and the others had seen the massacre on the main screen in the ballroom, it was nothing compared to the aftermath. Steeling himself as best he could, he turned to Big Red Dot, the number 1 pro hero of Singapore. Get everyone ready. We'll stick to the sidewalks as best we can. The Merlion hero did a double take between the hostages and the river of death before regarding All Might with shock. Surely you can't be serious. All Might did not repeat himself or yell. He stood there staring at the literal hell with a 1,000-yard stare. BRD swallowed before silently relenting as he walked over to the rest of the group. Midoriya forcefully held down the wave of bile rising in his throat, but Uraraka couldn't hold it in and vomit. After she was done retching, she buried her face in her hands and began crying. Izuku shuffled over to her and was about to comfort her when he suddenly lurched forward and gripped the sides of his dress shirt, burying her face into his shoulder and sobbing hysterically. "I can't take this. I can't take this." Uraraka whimpered, her tears staining Izuku's shirt. The boy could only hold his friend as she wept, glancing back at the sea of gore. He was experiencing the same feeling of despair and trauma as Uraraka. He couldn't even formulate words to comfort her. When he saw the other heroes escorting the civilians away, Midoriya gently held Uraraka and guided her over to follow the others. Izuku softly patted her back while mustering his courage, only to feel it falter when he took his first step into the sanguine water, feeling the blood seep into his shoes and soak his socks. Island's Central Tower 14th floor office of David Shield. The front door was kicked open with so much force the doors flew across the room and over David's desk, smashing through the large window behind it. The doomslayer walked inside the office with the bleeding Maruko in his arms and turned right into a large room with an operating table with an abundance of medical supplies on the counters. He carefully set Maruko down on the operating table, the heroine wincing and crying out in pain. He went over to the nearest cabinet, tore it open with his hands, and snatched the first bottle of morphine he found along with a syringe. He popped off the lid, dunked the needle inside, and pulled back on the plunger to absorb the liquid. He made sure to get the right amount, not wanting Maruko to suffer an overdose. Walking back over to the table, the Slayer injected the tip of the syringe into her wrist where he could see her veins and pushed the plunger down. Her rapid breathing began to slow down a little, and her pained expression softened, but was still clearly in a lot of Slayer, set the syringe down on a nearby operating tray, thankful for paying attention to those field medic lessons back on his Earthians ago. The next step was finding a way to remove those rebar rods. Normally, it would be unwise to remove the rebars due to the risk of damaging Maruko's nerves and blood vessels, but my scans have pinpointed a device that can circumvent said problem. His HUD guided him to a large display case that held several advanced medical implements that were made of some kind of carbon fiber material. He forcefully opened the glass case with his fist and grabbed an instrument that resembled a cordless power drill, but with a thin nozzle instead of a drill bit, and a translucent container filled with a thick, turquoise liquid. According to the tower's database, this surgical instrument is specially designed for impalement injuries. When removing said object from the wounded body, application of the solution to both the entrance and exit wounds will seal the injuries, as well as partially repair any damaged tissue and muscles. That sounded useful. His eyes drifted over to another tool that looked identical to what he held in his hand, but resembled a handheld sewing machine. This particular instrument is best suited for closing lacerations. It has seen widespread distribution across the world, rendering traditional suturing methods obsolete. The specially designed stitches are capable of completely sealing wounds and are laced with an enzyme that will regenerate lost tissue, after which the stitches will safely disintegrate over time. On a side note, this world's medical technology is surprisingly advanced, almost on par with the UAC/. Yeah, well, let's just hope the people who made these wouldn't go and open portals to hell so they could mine it for resources like the oil fields of Texas. Looking back at Maruko on the table, the Doomslayer knew that the rebars had to be removed, and that would hurt like hell for her, even with the morphine he gave her. After he put the medical tools on a tray next to the operating table, he went over to the drawers and looted around until he found a metal tongue depressor, gauze, and a hefty spray bottle of antiseptic. He wrapped the gauze around the depressor and walked back to Maruko, who creaked an eye open at him right up until the Slayer then forcibly pried her mouth open and stuck in the depressor. Ugh! Maruko gagged in confusion before the Slayer began spraying the antiseptic over her wounds, causing her to bite down on the depressor. Maruko shut her eyes as hard as she could as the Doomslayer kept spraying all of her cuts and anywhere else that had damaged skin. After he stopped, Maruko ceased biting down and relaxed a little as the stinging pain subsided when she felt whatever the vigilante injected her with finally take effect. And that's when she experienced the most white-hot, blisteringly mind-searing pain shot through her when the vigilante started pulling out the rods. Erg. Maruko screamed through the makeshift gag as she gnashed her teeth upon it so hard it almost snapped in two. Her eyes were wide open and bloodshot, darting around as the armored psycho pulled out another rod, making her scream again. Each time the doomslayer pulled out a rebar rod, he was quick to use the first instrument he picked up by applying the liquid to the entrance and exit wounds. The gel sunk into the circular punctures where they immediately settled in, presumably accomplishing what Vega described. The Slayer continued to pull out the rebars and treat the wounds, with poor Maruko spasming and uttering muffled shrieks. The echoes of clattering steel against the floor could be heard outside the office as the Slayer pulled out the last rebar. Maruko slumped into the operating tables, her eyes shut and beads of sweat rolled down her face as she breathed weakly. The Slayer took the depressor out of her mouth and could see tiny indentations where she clenched her teeth upon it. Discarding the depressor, the Hellwalker grabbed an office chair in the corner of the room, rolled it up next to her, and sat himself down while taking the suturing tool from the tray. He took Maruko by the arm and lined up the apparatus up to the first laceration he found. Pulling the trigger, the tool automatically stitched up the wound, closing it so perfectly with no blood seeping out. The Doomslayer resumed patching Maruko up, the heroine mustering the strength to open her eyes to stare at him. It dawned upon her that this man was helping her, an act that only served to confuse her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked weakly. The Slayer did not respond. He simply kept stitching her wounds. Maruko was too worn out to ask him again, and so she resigned herself to letting tend to her injuries while she stared at the ceiling. For the next several minutes, there was nothing but silence in the room, save for the sounds of the suturing device. Maruko's ears perked up when she heard approaching footsteps and Hawks stumbled into the doorway of the medical lab with his feather sword in one hand and a bleeding forehead. The wing hero looked ready for a fight, but his expression turned bewildered when he saw the vigilante providing first aid for his friend. "Did I, miss something?" He blinked. "You missed a lot." Maruko dryly responded. "Do tell," he said as he cautiously walked over to where Maruko lay, his eyes never leaving the vigilante until he inspected Maruko's wounds. "How are you feeling?" "Well, I'm doped up on whatever he gave me, so I'm pretty sure I'm high as a kite right now." Maruko smirked a little as she flexed her fingers. "Nice to see you haven't lost your sense of humor." He returned the smile. He focused back on the vigilante, and after deciding that he wasn't a threat, at least not at the moment, Hawks dematerialized his sword into feathers which then floated back up to his wings. "So, when can I expect Dr. Spartan here to give me his diagnosis?" The Slayer momentarily ceased his suturing to jerk his thumb over to a first aid kit on the far wall. "Much obliged." Hawks deflated as he walked over to it. As he popped open the case, the Doomslayer stood up and worked on Maruko's legs. The morphine had dulled the pain Maruko was in, but despite her impaired state, she still harbored suspicion against the vigilante. Not only that, but she disliked the feeling of vulnerability as she lay on the table. It made her feel weak and helpless, something that didn't suit her tough nature. Come to think of it, when was the last time she felt like this? She gazed up at the vigilante, who paid her no mind. "So, what compelled you to wage a one-man war on the Steel Sabers?" she questioned. The vigilante did not answer, frustrating her. "Hey, I'm talking to you. Let me guess, the silent type?" Hawks spoke up as he wrapped some bandages around his head while sitting on a counter. "We intervened in your operations to retake Island because your methods were deemed ineffective, / Maruko and Hawks were briefly startled at the synthetic voice that came from the vigilante. Hawks smiled. "Well, what do you know, he can talk." The Slayer lifted his head and tapped his finger against the small circular port on his chest plate. The TV monitor mounted on the ceiling turned itself on, revealing a white symbol with a light blue background, followed by a cheery tune. "Hello. I am a sentient artificial intelligence powered by the systems within his suit. I speak in his stead, / The duo's eyes were as big as dinner plates as they stared up at the talking TV. "Did not see that coming." Hawks muttered numbly. Maruko turned her head towards the Slayer. Just how much of that shit did you inject me with? She demanded. Taggart glanced at the bottle of morphine on the tray. Not enough, apparently. He also took note that Vega did not reveal their names or the name of his preacher's suit. Smart thinking on the AI's part. I am not a drug-induced hallucination, Ms. Usajiyama. To elaborate on your question, we interrupted your operations and engaged the Steel Sabers because they were not planning on letting the hostages live. Any demand or ransom they would have made was a stalling tactic to buy them more time so they could steal the island's support items. Afterward, they would execute the hostages once they were finished, / Hawks stared at the screen as a chill went down his back. As much as he wanted to deny the possibility of something like that happening several hours ago, it did sound like something only the Steel Sabers would pull off. He's not joking, Maruko confirmed as she turned to Hawks. They were setting up some kind of nuke up on the roof when I got here. Correction. The weapon of mass destruction was VX poison gas installed into a maximum dispersion rocket. The League of Villains intended to leave no witnesses of their activities, / Well, that sounds even worse. Hawks gulped before picking up on a certain detail the AI revealed. Hold on, you just said the League of Villains / they were in a joint operation with the Steel Sabers. Several agents arrived here with the WMD sometime during our initial assault to cover up any evidence of their involvement here once we disrupted the Sabers' operations, / No doubt sent here by Pruneface. Maruko deduced, obviously referring to Shigaraki. / Recent investigations we have conducted revealed that Shigaraki is not the true leader of the LOV. He is only a figurehead, / Hawks rubbed his chin as Maruko appeared confused. Looking back at the USJ villain invasion he heard about, was it really just a random attack or a coordinated scare tactic? Was Shigaraki bait, or did he have a purpose there? Either way, this mystery leader had to have some kind of ulterior motive at that time, and just now the Island siege. He decided to ask about the identity of the leader at another time. You said before that our methods were ineffective. I'm guessing you and your friend don't exactly have a high opinion of us. / On the contrary, your impressive service records are to be commended. Unfortunately, when up against a sizable army of mercenaries reputable for eliminating heroes, your usual strategy would not have been enough to retake Island and stop the Steel Sabers, / You know, we could have handled them if you hadn't blitzed us before. Maruko barked at the doomslayer as she jabbed a finger at him. / You would not have let us through, / Oh, and I guess putting 4 of us in the hospital was okay. Maruko snidely fired back. The doomslayer did not answer her, finishing up on her legs before moving on to her other arm. Great, giving me the cold shoulder. Maruko muttered to herself. The doomslayer wasn't ignoring her or anything like that. He was busy suturing the last of Maruko's cuts. And he simply chose not to talk. He had lost his ability to speak eons ago after receiving his demigodhood from Samur, Maker via the divinity machine. A process so horrifically painful that he nearly blew out his vocal cords from screaming in agony. It was painful for him to talk afterward, but he eventually got better and regained his speech. However, the continued mental trauma he received from all those eons of fighting demons was taking its toll on his sanity, and he eventually took on an oath of silence afterward. And even if he wanted to speak, what would he say to her? / If I may inquire, Ms. Usajiyama, why do you refrain from avoiding potentially lethal attacks? / Shockingly enough, that would have been the first thing he'd ask her. Huh, Maruko blurted. / You were perfectly capable of avoiding any of Wolfram's strikes, but you instead chose to throw yourself directly in their path, risking mortal, if not fatal injuries. Why is that? / Hawks fidgeted a bit where he sat. He always told Maruko half a dozen times not to take so many risks during a fight, but she just wouldn't listen to reason. He knew this most likely stemmed from her time as a vigilante, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't get her to abandon that mindset. And the fact this AI was accurately pointing this out made him nervous. Why do you care? Maruko huffed. She was almost tempted to ignore him like how he was ignoring her, but after glancing down at herself and seeing all of the good work he did in patching her up, she figured she owed him that much at least. Well, if you're that curious, being a hero doesn't come with risks. There is a real chance you could die in the line of duty, but that doesn't bother me one bit. I don't care if I lose a limb or 2, so long as I get to pummel whatever villain comes my way. You think that guy was going to end me? I live every day of my life like there's no tomorrow, so when my number's up, I can clock out with no regrets. She said with a proud smile, and her eyes closed. That's when she felt the vigilante pause his stitching and opened her eyes, only to see him glaring directly at her, looming over her like some kind of a reaper. Maruko felt intimidated as the featureless visor of the vigilante stared down at her. To her surprise, he slowly shook his head in disapproval. That is not a healthy mindset, Ms. Usagiyama. You should make an effort to avoid purposefully injuring yourself so that you may better combat your opponent, / Maruko was legitimately offended upon hearing that. What? I should be taking fighting lessons from a walking tank and his pet computer program. / You should not throw your life away so recklessly. Think about what you can do more for society in the future rather than focus on the impression you leave on others if you were to fall in battle as a result of your inability to avoid fatal harm, / As the TV shut itself off, Maruko was stunned silent while the vigilante resumed patching her wounds. She never thought of that before, though it made her uncomfortable. She lived with her creed for years, but this was the first time someone, or in this case an AI, told her that her logic was flawed. She couldn't find a comeback or any way to defend her opinions and opted to just sink back into her seat as she felt herself succumbing to fatigue, looking away from the vigilante with a light flush on her cheeks. Hawks sat wide-eyed at Maruko, surprised that she backed down from someone pointing out the flaws in her outlook. He was just a little dismayed that it wasn't him. Maybe he should have taken her to a psychiatrist after convincing her to leave her vigilante life behind. The doomslayer finally closed the last laceration wound and discarded the tool onto the floor. He observed Maruko starting to fall asleep, her eyes struggling to remain open. "Thank you," she slurred out before sleep finally claimed her. The slayer could tell that wasn't the anesthetic talking. She truly thanked him. Hawks hopped off the table and walked over to the operating table with a relieved smile. The doomslayer could tell that Hawks was her friend and decided she would be safest with him, keeping her guard. He walked around the table and went over to the exit. "Hey, hold up a sec," a friendly voice stopped him. Annoyed, the Hellwalker glanced over his shoulder to Hawks as he slowly stepped forward with his hands raised. "Easy there. I'm not going to try and stop you. I learned that the hard way. I just want to talk." The doomslayer wasn't buying it, but humored him nonetheless. "The fact that you helped my friend speaks a lot of volumes about you, if you know what I mean." Hawks started off, maintaining a casual posture. "Most of us heroes were ready to write you off as a psycho, but after seeing your little impromptu recreation of a medical drama episode, and now that I know you saved the hostages at the airport, it's kind of shed some light on you. You're not all that bad." "Oh no, he was bad, but not evil bad. However, what you did here won't exactly make everyone turn a blind eye to you, especially how you dealt with us back at the port. I mean, sure, the Steel Sabers were horrible people, but was it honestly necessary to paint the town with their blood?" That was asked. That was literally just asked. Vega, somehow sensing the Slayer's bafflement, turned the TV back on, causing Hawks to turn around. What the TV showed, to Hawks' disturbance, was photos of the Steel Sabers' crimes against heroism. Dozens of heroes shot up, blown up, or hunted down like animals. Some footage consisted of helmet cam footage of Saber soldiers shredding the costumed Crusaders of Justice with bullets or giving them with explosive ordnance. It disturbed Kigo greatly, and as much as he wanted to look away from the screen, he was glued to every bloody atrocity the Sabers carried out. The TV finally shut itself off, just as the last bit of video footage showed Nine ordering his lieutenants to execute a group of captured heroes. Hawks vacantly stared at the floor as he wiped off the sweat from his bandaged forehead. He glanced up at the vigilante, who stared back at him. Hawks hung his head again and cleared his throat. "You've made your point," he reluctantly admitted. "But as a hero, I will say that you went too dash." The Bane of Hell instantly threw a straight punch to Kigo's face, taking advantage of his distraction to knock him out. Kigo dropped to the floor like a sack of potatoes, unconscious and motionless. Out of courtesy for Maruko's friend, the Slayer dragged him over to the counter by his leg and propped him up against the furniture. The Slayer mentally questioned Hawk's attempt at reasoning with him, but waved it off as buying time. He was about to leave when he noticed something behind a stainless steel storage cabinet. He walked over to it and noticed a crease running up the length of the wall. He moved the cabinet aside, or rather knocked it over, and could make out the shape of a doorframe installed into the white metal wall. Scans indicate there is a room behind this hidden door. Accessing now. With an audible clunk, a section of the wall retracted to the left, revealing a darkened and extensive medical lab. The Slayer entered the room and took note of the large pod in the middle of the lab connected to numerous wires and various medical apparatuses. He walked up to the pod and ran his hand against it, reminding him of the sarcophagus the demons sealed him in. Vega turned on the computer at the other end of the room, and the Slayer took a closer look, observing what appeared to be a line chart that made a very sharp dip to the bottom with red colors. But what was it for? The red poured on his chest blinked, indicating there was an echo in this room. Echoes were holographic records of certain events. His suit could detect past events of interest and display them as holograms. It was a handy feature that the wretch implemented into his suit, and then of course the UAC managed to copy it when they recovered his sarcophagus and the Predator suit. The recording began when two pixelated blue forms coalesced inside the room. David Shields sitting at his computer and a boxers-clad man laying inside the pod wearing a breathing mask. The Doomslayer studied the man in the pod with interest. He was a lanky, emaciated individual with an oddly angular face, dark scara with blue irises, and messy blonde hair that sprang out in different directions. What caught the Slayer's attention was the mass of damaged skin and scar tissue upon the man's midsection. It was almost as if a pinky took a bite out of his body. He looked at the holographic vitals on the pod. It did not look good for this guy. He heard the hologram of David gasping as he looked at the chart, just as the man sat up in the pod, his body phasing through the hatch. "I don't get it, Toshi. Why are your quirk levels going down so dramatically? I know you were seriously injured by All for One, but to suddenly get these numbers is absurd. What in the world happened to you?" And there it was again, All for One. The head of the LOV had some sort of connection to this Toshi, but what was it? The Doomslayer kept listening to their conversation. Any info he could get on the villain would be helpful in the long run. He heard Toshi cough. "I suppose if you're a hero for a long time, your body starts to fall apart." There was a dull silence in the room as the men looked away from each other. David spoke again. "At this rate, the symbol of peace will disappear." This only further cemented the connection between AFO and All Might, not to mention the hero's injury. But the more the Slayer thought, the more noticed something peculiar. He inspected Toshi's face and concentrated on his tired eyes. He felt like he had seen those eyes before. That's when the realization hit him, his eyes widening in response. Toshi was All Might. This walking skeleton was the symbol of peace. The Slayer wondered how this was possible, but figured that his quirk allowed him to transform into a muscular state. He looked at the line chart and then back to Toshi's wound. Whatever AFO did to him, it affected his quirk and its power seemed to be decreasing. David continued, "The only reason Japan is able to keep its crime rate at 6% is because of your presence. Other countries have around 20%, and some are even worse than that. Honestly, part of me wishes you never left. America could use you." So All Might had a bigger morale effect on the populace than he thought. He really was the glue holding this country together. It was no wonder why so many people looked up to him. To lose All Might would be devastating for everyone, and crime would skyrocket as criminals would have nothing to fear anymore. Hearing that info about other countries' crime rates gave him the impression that the heroes there either stretched thin or their villains were tough customers. Yagi walked over to David. "There's no need for you to be so pessimistic, Dave. The world is full of capable pro-heroes, not to mention the good people like you who support them. Besides, I can still be All Might for a few hours each day. I'm not dead yet, Dash. Come on, what if a monstrous villain appears and you're not capable of saving us again? Listen, just in case that day comes, understand that I have no intention of stepping down." And with that, the holograms dissipated. The Doomslayer stood in the middle of the room as he absorbed all of this info. All Might had a time limit for his powers, and there was also the heavy implication that he was dying. It was a lot to take in. But despite all of that, this man had the courage and willpower to keep on fighting to protect innocent people. He had a newfound respect for Toshi, but now realized his encounter with him in the ballroom more than likely made All Might label him a psychopath. Regardless of that, he still admired All Might and the heroes for fighting against the impossible. He noticed a small picture frame near the computer and picked it up. It was an old photo that depicted a much younger All Might and David, smiling happily with Toshi's arm slung over his friend's shoulder. Flynn could see the staggering difference between how All Might looked back then and how he looked now. From shining paragon of justice to a near-crippled man on his last legs. All for One was going to die for this. He then focused on David's shield and frowned. For all his efforts to mitigate All Might's condition, he never even considered the lives of the people and his daughter he was endangering. Despite his seemingly good intentions, it was blind fanaticism at its core, something he had seen way too many times in his war against Hell. Also, the quirk amplification headset would have made things worse for All Might if Wolfram was any indication. But he wasn't going to kill David, just let him be haunted by his idiotic actions for the rest of his life. I have downloaded the information from David's personal computer, but I still need to analyze them. You should head to the vault. The vault? Oh yeah, he had almost forgotten about his other objectives. He set the picture frame face down and left the room, stopping to look at Maruko. Still conflicted about her resemblance to Emily, the Slayer figured that maybe it was for the best to avoid her for the time being. And yet he couldn't help but think he was going to meet her again. He headed towards the door and was just about to leave the room when he heard Maruko speak. They deserved it. He glanced over his shoulder to see Maruko stirring her sleep, mumbling to herself as she shifted. Those hero-murdering bastards, they all deserved it. The doomslayer stared at her for a few seconds before leaving the room and out of the office. Finally, someone agreed with him. To be continued. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub, and share.